everybody, and welcome to Retro Encounter, RPG fans' podcast of many topics, mostly of the retro variety. As you can probably tell, I am not Zach Wilkerson, but you may recognize my voice. It's me, Aleks Franiczek, taking over for hosting duties for today's episode. We also had, Ben host his first episode recently, so I think Zach is, just exploring his bullpen options lately. Not sure why. I have a sneaking suspicion, but I won't be
Are
guessing.
you trying to trigger my World Series PTSD, Alex?
No, I'm not trying to trigger anybody's World Series PTSD. Every time I do, everybody gets sad, and that's not what I want. I want high energy. I want excitement for this episode.
3 Torontonians on this podcast, and that's how you open.
Well,
Reference to baseball god. Have some tact.
Well, hey, if I can put off the kind of performance Yamamoto did in Game 7, I'll be happy with my support hosting duties. Anyways, enough PTSD. I am glad Zach picked me for this episode. We'll get into introducing the episode topic in a second, but first I want to introduce my panel because I don't want any of you to be too alarmed by my lack of expertise, because I'm actually joined by two very experienced RPG fan hosts in our panel here, which is quite good. First of which is Random Encounters Jono Logan.
Hey, all.
And then we have Retro Encounter support host extraordinaire Wes.
Hi, everybody.
And lastly, we have Retro Encounter rookie extraordinaire Matt Wardell.
What, am I not an expert? Hey.
I mean, you're getting there, man.
Another baseball reference? Jesus.
Yeah.
Everyone has it out for you. It's
Rookie of the year.
Okay, but I do want to introduce our topic today, which is on Obsidian. So this is going to be part of our, developer encounter series that we have. I personally am a enormous fan of Obsidian's work. They might be my favorite Western RPG developer. They have a very storied history, a very fascinating history that we're going to be covering today. And we also thought it was a good time to talk about them because it's kind of been a big year for the studio. They actually have 2.5 releases that came out this year. They started out the year pretty strong with Avowed. Grounded 2 got in early access sometime in the summer, and pretty recently they released their sequel to The Outer Worlds. So Obsidian's firing on all cylinders this year, but we're going to be talking not only about the newer stuff, but also diving into their history. So before we get into it, though, I just want to explain how the format's going to work for this episode, because we're not just going to go kind of one game at a time, as we often do with these developer encounters. There's a lot to cover here, and I think there's some variations in terms of our familiarity across the panel with the games. So we're going to do it like this. So I divided this into a couple of different eras of the studio. And what I'm going to do is we're going to go one era at a time, essentially. So I'm going to briefly introduce every game that happens in the era we're covering. And then any of you are also welcome to chime in with any, fun trivia facts, in the meantime, this doesn't just have to be me explaining the history by myself. I invite any contributions as they come up. Then after we go through every game, we're just going to discuss kind of our overall impressions of Obsidian's work during that era, and then we're going to start honing in more into the games we most want to talk about. But before we get into the history itself, I want to talk about everybody's personal history with the studio, actually. So if we can just go in an order here, just talking about, when you first became familiar with Obsidian's work, what was the first maybe game that you played, or the first one that made a strong impression on you? Very interested to hear your thoughts, and maybe we'll start with you, Jono.
Unsurprisingly for me, it was Fallout New Vegas. Back then, when I first played it, would have been 2015, so a few years after it came out. And I had just played Fallout 3 over Christmas, and I was in Scotland getting my master's. We had the Christmas breaks there were nuts. So yeah, I finished Fallout 3. I was like, I want more of this. So I installed New Vegas, which promptly crashed a couple of times. And then I taught myself all about mods and played through New Vegas, and obviously fell in love with it. I think we've done retro encounters on it that I've hosted. Yeah, so my first experience was with Fallout New Vegas. Uh, I'm jumping around the list here. Funny enough, my next exposure would probably be South Park Stick of Truth, which we'll be talking about in a bit because I actually have a fair bit to say about it. Um, and then, tried Pillars of Eternity, uh, Tyranny, things like that. And then The Outer Worlds came out a few years ago, and I was really into The Outer Worlds because spiritual successor to New Vegas. And just finished The Outer Worlds 2 days ago. So yeah, I have a bit of experience with this studio, and quite a bit of thoughts about their work.
Okay, well, I very much look forward to hearing them. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I feel like similar to Jono, like I had seen their logo pop up here and there in like sequels, and for the longest time I was kind of disappointed because I'm like, oh, like how come such and such developer isn't making the sequel? Like, why are these guys getting, passed off to again? And it wasn't until New Vegas that I really started to respect them in their own right and be like, okay, like these guys are capable of like surpassing the people that that so long it felt like they've been aping, right? And I think since New Vegas, I became like excited to see what they were coming up with next. They were all over the place in like the PS3 generation, like a lot of misses, a lot of like, coulda, woulda, shoulda. I feel like, but I feel like I've played a lot more of their recent original IPs, and like it feels like they're finally coming to their full fruition as like what the promise that they've always made in terms of like storytelling and not just mimicking like a great developer before them. So yeah, I'm an Obsidian fan too, and I believe they're capable of great things and better things now.
Okay, unreal. Thank you. Wes, are you also introduced with them firstly through New Vegas, or are you going to be the outlier here?
Oh, I'm gonna be the old person here. So I actually, the original Knights of the Old Republic was kind of the game that got me into Western RPGs. I'd played some before then, but that was the one where I'm like, okay, I can jive with this completely. Um, and then when Knights of the Old Republic 2 was coming out and they said it was by a different developer, I was obviously a little bit nervous. Then they said it's this new team made up of people from Black Isle, which was another studio I really respected at that point. I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And then I played KOTOR 2, and I'm like, oh my god, in a lot of ways, this surpasses the first one. And from then I was kind of like, okay, this Obsidian team, I'm just gonna follow them until they do something wrong. And by the time they ever did do anything that I would consider wrong, I was already locked in. Too bad for that to bother me too much. So I've kind of been there since really early. I had to look at this games list to realize that KOTOR 2 was their first official release. Despite the studio having a wealth of experience, most of their members collaboratively on so many other games beforehand. Um, so yeah, been a big Obsidian fan forever. Still pick up just about everything that they put out. Um, I think they've still got a lot of that magic, even if they're experimenting more. So some of their hits are becoming either really stinking good or like, okay, they're in their experimental era here. I still think everything they put out has something special to it.
Yeah, I really love how they've been, especially in the last couple of years, been able to kind of balance their more mainstream successes. Really, they have really established themselves as like a sort of AAA competitor in the space, but they still do that experimental stuff that like really endeared me to them at first. But I mean, you two, Matt, Jono, my first experience with Obsidian was New Vegas. I think I went over some of this history on when we did that New Vegas retro encounter earlier this year, but I had already played a couple of Western RPGs. Grew up mostly playing JRPGs, like many other people on the site. But I enjoyed my time with games like Fallout 3 and KOTOR. But what like kind of held those games back for me was the very binary moral systems that I felt didn't really make the most of like being able to choose a lot of different dialogue choices and things like that, and actual role playing a character, which seemed to be like the main promise of Western RPGs. And games like New Vegas and then KOTOR 2, which I played after, really opened my eyes up to what good writing in Western RPGs can do for the experience. Just a lot more variety in terms of the options you're getting in dialogue trees. Not just needing to play kind of either a goody two shoes type archetype or just an evil jerk kind of character. I really appreciated how Obsidian explored the gray spaces between morality that a lot of Western developers at the time seemed to just be preferring to make it simple with just having binary moral systems. So yeah, what really endeared me to the studio was that earlier work. It felt like they were just like a punk rock kind of entity within like the AAA space. And while like BioWare, Bethesda was like sticking and establishing industry trends, Obsidian was always pushing themselves to do something different, with a lot of kind of mixed results, but something that was always endearing me towards their work. Okay, so with that, I think we can start getting into the history itself. But we're actually not going to start with Obsidian. As Wes alluded to, Obsidian's history is very much tied up with another development studio, which is Black Isle Studio. And a lot of their founders ended up leaving Black Isle Studio to form Obsidian. But Black Isle was one of the developers that were working under Interplay at the time, Interplay being a pretty prominent video game developer and publisher from the began in like the 80s. They were the creator of Wasteland, for example, and they were just involved in a lot of other work from that time there. But they eventually they wanted to support a spiritual successor to Wasteland, which ended up being the original Fallout, a game led by people such as Tim Kaine, Leonard Boyarsky, and Christopher Taylor, who would end up forming a different studio after the game's release, which was Troika Games, which I kind of regard as like, I don't know, like Obsidian's kind of sibling. They were another very ambitious RPG, Western RPG developer around this time in like the early 2000s. They did Vampire Masquerade Bloodlines, for example. But those personnel, I named them because they also end up joining Obsidian in later years, but we'll get into that later. So, with the actual Obsidian developers, really the first game that they worked on was a Fallout 2. So, Black Isle Studio, after the success of Fallout, was kind of Interplay's new internal RPG studio led by Fergus Urquhart, who would end up being the CEO for Obsidian. So with Fallout 2, they were kind of continuing building off of the foundation Fallout 1 established. And the games they would develop under the Interplay mantle were kind of building off of that legacy they're already getting at with more adult-oriented RPGs with mature themes, not just kind of Dungeons and Dragons style work like a lot of Western RPGs still were adhering to at the time. So Fallout 2 came out in 1998, a year after the original Fallout. Its development time was pretty rushed, as you're going to be hearing that a lot, by the way, as we go through Obsidian's history. Is a game that in many ways was more ambitious than Fallout, if not as tight and thematically or design-wise cohesive. I It also kind of established Obsidian's tendency to use factions as kind of narrative tools where you meet a lot of the world building happens through these different organizations you meet tied to the world, and you get to express allegiance or defy them in ways, and that becomes a way that you role play in the world. So that was Fallout 2. A year after that, we got Planescape Torment, which was the first project led by kind of Obsidian superstar Chris Avallone, a very well-known writer and designer. And Planescape Torment was a pretty fascinating D&D style RPG that wasn't kind of really high fantasy Tolkien-esque fantasy, but was a lot more kind of moody, philosophical in nature, with a lot of just focus on like dialogue choices over well balanced combat. The combat is not a highlight here with Planescape Torment, but it is a very fascinating game to still play to this day. Really, really interestingly written.
And like I feel like so far, like what we've seen with Fallout 2 and Planescape, it's like when they're given the keys to the kingdom of like a major franchise, they take it to such weird directions almost immediately,
Mhm.
which is something that I really like about their style. But Planescape Torment to me, it looks like a theme that I noticed like when looking at their gameography. I'm like, how many games do they have where you wake up with like amnesia basically, and the role playing element of like building your character is like you piecing together your past and like deciding real time, like, did I do this bad thing in the past? Did I do this good thing in the past? What about now? Am I going to do a bad thing now, good thing now? I've noticed that in like KOTOR 2 and later in like Pentiment and like a lot of their games. They have like this very non-linear morality system that I really like, where it's like you're dictating the past as well as the present. I don't know if you guys have like noticed that trend in their games.
Yeah, they try to make systems a little bit more diegetic, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like they want the things that you're doing to be reflected in some kind of in-universe way. They want to really pull you in, um narratively using gameplay effects, which is something that they've always been really good at. That's a pretty interesting, you don't see a lot of studios do it, but when you do, it's usually pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think one of the things that these folks really, really tried to do, and one of the reasons why I think their what's the phrase, reach exceeded their grasp in a lot of these games, is that they wanted to do things that, frankly speaking, were very, very difficult to do under the time constraints and money restraints of the period. Um, and you can see now in later years how those that ambition really, really did pay off with a lot of their games that are considered to be, classics, because all of a sudden they had the resources to actually do it. But for years, Black Isle, actually pretty much any minor studio under Interplay were under like a constant bombardment from uh the suits, I guess you could say, to finish faster, get it done faster. And a lot of times that meant that a lot of their games didn't quite reach the levels I think they wanted to, but the reason why I think they're remembered is because at least the effort was there. They tried, and in many cases they succeeded to a level, the best level they could at the time.
It's very much like they were trying to make a tabletop role playing like the equivalent of a tabletop player's imagination, to be like, okay, we want you to be able to do anything in this digital version of a role playing game. But yeah, the technology just wasn't there. And even like with games like Baldur's Gate 3 nowadays, it's like it's getting there, but it's still not close to like the level of four or five people's shared imagination around a table. But it's
Mm.
definitely admirable that's what they're like aiming for.
Well, I mean, that's how they prototyped the unreleased Fallout 3, Van Buren. They essentially, Chris Avellone made it into a tabletop RPG, and they prototyped it and they worked it that way to develop systems.
Huh.
Yeah, Chris Avellone and Josh Sawyer, who are probably
Yeah.
like the two most prominent, I don't know if you want to call them auteur figures in the studio's history. Like they're both huge tabletop fans, as you kind of, I would imagine, have to be if you want to become an ambitious and successful Western RPG developer, which is very much tied to tabletop history. But I think that also goes back to your observation, Matt, where you were talking about the ways that like you're kind of in these games encouraged to construct your character's identity through dialogue choices as you're playing rather than beforehand, because obviously in a tabletop game you're like considered to reflect on all those elements of your character before you even start playing. But in the digital game context, like that's not really how most people approach it. So to provide those opportunities as they come up through dialogue and kind of happen organically in the player's own narrative experience with the game, I think it's a really brilliant way that you can have more role playing and like character construction sort of opportunities like smoothly integrated into the gameplay of a digital game. But yeah, so Fallout 2 and Planescape Torment were two really big releases. Planescape Torment, I believe, wasn't a huge commercial success. I think it was maybe too talky even for the time that Western RPGs were filled with text. Like the Baldur's Gate games were also released around this time, obviously, um, to much better commercial success. But then Obsidian did end up developing their own sort of more traditional D&D type experiences with the two Icewind Dale games. So Icewind Dale 1 coming out in 2000, Icewind Dale 2 coming out 2002, and these were much more gameplay focused than Fallout 2 and Planescape Torment. A lot more focused on kind of balance, combat, party building, things like that. And these games look, sound, and play quite nice. Their later Infinity Engine games, which was the platform Interplay was allowing all its developers to use at the time. And this was also the time that Josh Sawyer first started working as a designer on their work with these Icewind Dale games, which again, not so much great for their narrative work, but really good ambiance and kind of co-op Western RPG gameplay as well. Icewind Dale 1 and Planescape are also both available on modern platforms now, I thought I'd add, through the enhanced editions. So these are still games that are easy to play. But then kind of just like to move towards the end of this period, like Interplay was not doing well financially, despite the success of games like the Baldur's Gate franchise and even Icewind Dale to an extent. They're just losing their money to from other dealings, I suppose, and they eventually lost the D&D license, which was a huge blow for all their developers because at this time, Black Isle was actually supposed to develop the original Baldur's Gate 3, The Black Hound, which ended up getting canceled. And oh man, as a fan of those original Baldur's Gate games, getting a third one developed by Black Isle instead of BioWare and seeing how that would have been different, that's something that I would have loved to see somehow revived. But I mean, I guess we have Baldur's Gate 3 now, which is good. And also Fallout Van Buren, the original Fallout 3, as you alluded to, Jono, also ended up getting canceled due to the loss of funds. And this is when Obsidian's founders ended up leaving the studio to form their own with Obsidian. So this included 5 founders, which was the CEO, Fergus Urquhart, who's still with the studio now, kind of being their main decision maker in terms of projects. There was obviously Chris Avallone at this time, who's their main kind of creative force, their designer and writer, who was with the studio all the way till 2015 when he left. There's another one was Chris Parker, who was a producer and director on a lot of their work. Darren Monahan, who was a lot of production work and worked as the CIO, and also Chris Jones, who was one of their main programmers and ended up overseeing the programming on a lot of their following works. Eventually, Josh Sawyer would join them as well after Van Buren tanked, but that would be in a couple of years after. So that's the history of Black Isle as it kind of ties in with Obsidian. Before we move on to Obsidian, I was just wondering, we already got into a couple of these games, but what were your overall impressions of any of these games you played? I want to ask you guys. How do you see these works as kind of proto Obsidian beyond the ways that we've already talked about?
One of the things that struck me as we were talking about all of these, and I guess it's kind of hit me before, but it hit so much more pronounced now, is how often Obsidian and Proto Obsidian um, really loved to take something established, whether it's a franchise, a license, a system, and try to find something unique about it, some unique angle, something that exists already, but that they can explore in a very different way. Maybe most prominently in Planescape, where they're like, we've got the D&D license, we're going to make a D&D game, but we're going to explore like the sci-fi cosmic horror kind of aspects of this game, which is not what you think of when you think of D&D. You think of traditional Lord of the Rings style sword and sorcery fantasy. And while that's, of course present because that is core to D&D, it's got all of these other settings that can lead you into different directions. And Planescape's like, hey, we've never seen one of those in a video game. Let's try that. Same with how Icewind Dale 1 and 2 were both like, let's look at the combat, the gameplay of these things, rather than um, giving you this broadcast of characters and having that be kind of the focus. This was the one where it was really focused on, you make all of these D&D characters, try to make a party that works together, really get invested into the combat of this and build an RPG kind of around that. And as we go through their history, I think you're going to see that again and again, where they will take something that exists, especially in their sequel era, and find some new aspect of it to focus on, or find some angle that you would not think of as the immediate obvious angle. And I think that's part of what makes Obsidian and earlier Black Isle, so special.
You can tell that they are fans of the properties that they have their like hands all over, because they make these deep references and they take them to weird places. Like even like I was surprised, like looking back into Fallout 2, which I've played before but never through to completion, but like it's like, oh yeah, like I thought New Vegas was like the first weird Fallout with like the Wild Wasteland perk and everything, but like Fallout 2, it's like there's talking death claws and like there's all kinds of like wacky stuff going on like immediately.
Weird fucking
Um
game.
it's really weird, yeah. And like I love that they just like immediately take it that way, like with like they're very fearless in their like narrative ideas. But it's like you said, Alex, it's like right from the hop, it's like you see this trend of like, okay, rush production, great writing, lots of bugs. And it's like it's the same old song and dance for like 30 years, I feel like. But yeah, that's part of like their charm, I feel like. It's like their bravery and like even with their ambition, I guess, is always present.
I guess when I look at this period, when I look at Black Isle and I look at their output, and then I look at just how I realized that Interplay was hurting for money at this point. But there were a few studios back in these days that just gave up on certain genres, including CRPGs, adventure games. I mean, LucasArts did this with their adventure game division in exactly the same time when Black Isle really started to close down because of getting rid of the original version of Fallout 3 while it was still in development. And it's very interesting to me how these folks had to go off and they had to create their own studios and they had to do their own thing in order to advance their ideas of what video games could be. And in the case of Black Isle Studios, many of their ideas of what video games could be are what video games are now. Like a lot of their ideas about character progression, in terms of immersion, in terms of world building, that's just the standard now. And they were so far ahead of their times. It kind of makes me wonder what would have happened if Interplay had given them the resources they need. The extra, I think it was 18 months to finish developing Fallout 3. What the video game world would look like now if they got to keep pushing their ideas back then, instead of going into what we're about to see is kind of their work for hire era.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because like I already alluded to it a bit with like some of the most mainstream Western RPGs that would come out in the next 10 years, but with these original Fallout games with Planescape Torment, there was already such a focus on an understanding of how role playing could be done, how good dialogue trees could be written that were like engaging and could go in depth. Like you could spend in Planescape Torment, for example, like 20 minutes with conversing with a single character, which is incredible as you're getting like picking up all this lore and building your own character through it. Which is something we see a lot more in Western RPGs again of the last like 10 years, with that kind of being again put at the focus, seeing the limitations of that binary moral system as it was kind of standardized in the kind of PS3, Xbox 360 era. So, yeah, I mean, ambitious and ahead of their time is definitely something that I think is appropriate to say for the studio. Okay, so we'll now move on to the second era, which I kind of titled in a way that is going to sound demeaning, maybe perhaps, but I swear it isn't because this is probably my personal favorite era of Obsidian, which I've termed the sequel duty / jank era. So this was a time that Obsidian was mainly just tasked with getting jobs where they were reusing and repurposing engines and licenses from other developers to make sequels to popular Western RPGs at the time. So they were constantly switching publishers, they were constantly switching the development tools they were working with, being forced to complete projects under pretty unreasonable time constraints. And what that led to was, I mean, it's kind of a continuation of what we were talking about with Black Isle already. A lot of ambitious creative direction that was compromised by publisher needs and timelines. A lot of their games around this time were released to some mixed critical receptions, but pretty much all of them, I think I would say, have kind of become cult classics since their somewhat mixed releases. And the first game we're going to start with is, and the first official Obsidian release is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, These Sith Lords, which came out in 2004, published by LucasArts and is, of course, a sequel to Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, BioWare's monumental RPG that kind of was responsible for bringing CRPG game design to consoles in a way that felt accessible and easy and polished. And of course, it was a Star Wars RPG, which, what a concept. And it was really excellently executed by BioWare in terms of just kind of feeling like a Star Wars story and playing with the same kind of frameworks and narrative tropes that we saw in like the Star Wars movies, for example. So the writing for KOTOR 2 already began before KOTOR's release, actually. BioWare already had offered Obsidian the Star Wars license because they trusted them from being both under Interplay at the time, where Black Isle and BioWare were kind of working at the same time, and using BioWare's proprietary Odyssey engine that they used for the first game and reusing assets to kind of help with the time constraints. But unlike KOTOR 1, KOTOR 2 was a lot less interested in being kind of a safe, if not interesting and successful release in the Star Wars canon, because this was like a complete subversion of what a lot of people, understood Star Wars to be. Um, Kind of being more of an exploration of nihilism through this kind of questioning of the light side dark side binary, and what ended up happening was an incredibly engaging RPG and probably my personal favorite Obsidian game, if I'm being honest, but I won't get
Oh.
too much into that now.
Yeah, not to
um
piss off half of our audience, but they kind of pulled The Last Jedi.
yeah.
Oh,
But
okay.
in a much better way, a much better
I
way.
I was thinking about this like leading up to it, like everything that I wanted Last Jedi to do, and that they like teased about the gray force and like the gray Jedi. I'm like, no, like they just like veer away from that, and I was so disappointed. But like this game did it like 20 or like, I guess 15 years beforehand. But I was a huge Star Wars fan, like as a kid. Like everything in my bedroom was Star Wars, Star Wars. And I was a PlayStation player my whole life. Didn't have a PC either. And I used to hold this game at like EB Games in Canada, like the Xbox copy. And like the cover was so cool. I yearned for this game as like a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old. And yeah, like if I had played it at that time, like I like this game. I appreciate this game. I would have loved this game for what it was doing with the Star Wars universe at the time.
On a
Yeah,
related
really.
note, sorry, can I just ask? Has anyone here? I suspect they're Star Wars fans. Has anyone here read any of the novels?
All of
Oh,
them.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Heir to the
yeah.
Okay, so we have some Heir to the Empire fans here. Okay, good.
Of course.
Yeah.
Um,
That's all I read for like from ages like 7 through 12. I feel like was Star Wars novels. But
I'm I'm gonna be the sole voice on a slight tangent. I've always loved the idea of like questioning the binary of Star Wars. So yeah, KOTOR 2 hit so smooth. But I still love The Last Jedi, which seems like it's not popular in this group either.
No, I love it. Don't get
But
me wrong. I was
it's
saying it was
fine.
divisive because we're divided.
Oh,
Yeah, it's fine.
I needed to speak out on behalf of the fans to make sure that they know they're not alone. And if anyone does hate that opinion and wants to yell at me about it, you can find me on socials at Evoker for Dogs. Hit me up.
Yeah.
Jesus
that
Christ.
is definitely Wes's social. You will definitely be reaching Wes if you contact that person. I'll just add fuel to the fire here. I like Last Jedi too. I think it was my favorite of this newest trilogy, which I didn't really like. So
Oh no, the first and third films are garbage.
yeah,
100%.
for real. But back to KOTOR 2, because we don't want to burn the barn here too early in the episode. This was just like a complete subversion. I think I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, probably not as big of a Star Wars fan as any of you guys based on the sound of it, but I do have quite a few fond memories of the property, and I honestly think KOTOR 2 might be my favorite Star Wars thing ever, just because of how clever the subversion is. I think it's the most interesting thing to be done with that entire ethos, personally. But anyways, KOTOR 2 was released in a pretty buggy and incomplete state. Big surprise. I told you you'd be hearing that again. It was supposed to be developed in just 15 months, and was supposed to release for the holiday 2004 season. But Obsidian asked for an extension on it because the game wasn't near done yet. And LucasArts actually gave them the extension to 2005 and then retracted it. So then Obsidian was forced to just release the game anyways after being under the impression that they were going to have extra time to finish it. And the game ended up being buggy. It had a lot of content just straight up cut out of it. Fortunately, modders have come to the rescue, as they have with a lot of Obsidian's work during this time, making a Sith Lords Restored content mod that fixes around 500 bugs, and brings back some of the content cut from the game, including an entire planet of androids that has this. I don't know if any of you guys did the Android planet, but it's got fan made voice acting, which clashes so much in terms of quality and mixing with the rest of the voice acting that I remember just laughing out loud when I first got to this planet because of how silly it felt. But it was good to finally play through that content. But yeah, that's the history of KOTOR 2. So their next game after that was Neverwinter Nights 2 in 2006, which is again a sequel to a BioWare game, that first Neverwinter Nights. So this was produced by Atari, who actually didn't produce the original game, and they approached Obsidian with the idea after they got their hands on a D&D license. So I don't know if anybody played the first Neverwinter Nights, but it's not a very good campaign. It's kind of uh, the quality of that release was more in terms of the toolkit that it gave players to develop their own, what they called modules for the game, basically their own little campaigns and content. But what Neverwinter Nights 2 was quite different. It was a lot more of a successful single player focused campaign. I think this was the closest we had to a Baldur's Gate 3 that wasn't a Baldur's Gate 3 at the time. It was very much steeped in D&D. It adapted the newest 3.5 D&D edition, which was a huge improvement in terms of quality life over the second edition that they were working with during Interplay's time.
What, you don't like Thaco?
I don't want to engage with Thaco ever again. No, not especially. So simple was better here. But at the same time, I don't think this game had quite the charm of the Baldur's Gate games. But nonetheless, it was successful. It was a solid D&D adventure that also birthed a couple of expansions, including Mask of the Betrayer, which I think is the real Obsidian product here. It reminds me a lot of kind of the more subversive elements of Planescape Torment and KOTOR 2, um, kind of taking place immediately after the original Neverwinter Nights, but with a kind of much more interesting premise, more unique companions, more engaging dialogue trees, and this cool kind of spirit eating mechanic where your character has to consume the spirits of other beings in order to sustain themselves. Really, really cool expansion and unique idea. And then they also worked on Storm of Zahir, which came out in 2008, which was a more kind of basic, but still successful expansion.
I think this
Yeah,
year in July, I think the complete edition of Neverwinter Nights 2, the remaster, came out July 2025. So I think that includes all the expansions. It was Mark reviewed it for the site, and he had a really great review. But yeah, definitely one that's on my radar that I want to go back and play for the expansions.
yeah, for sure. I mean, that enhanced edition does seem great, as you explain. And I mean, even if people aren't too interested in a very long kind of generic D&D style base campaign, I think Mask of the Betrayer is worth anybody playing, as long as you don't mind being thrown into high level D&D, which is a little bit to manage with if you're not familiar.
Mm.
But yeah, anyways, so their next official game won't actually be till 2010, so 4 years after the release of the Neverwinter Nights 2 base game. That's because the next few years are kind of plagued with a couple of cancellations and offers from publishers falling through. And I just want to highlight a couple of these. There's actually a lot more to kind of read into at this time, but some of the most prominent ones Projects that got canceled include the project Dwarfs, which was supposed to be a console action RPG released on like PS3, Xbox 360. It's supposed to be a prequel to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that was officially licensed by Disney.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was during the period where Disney was like, we want to get into video games.
Yeah,
After
with
Kingdom Hearts
like
2, I guess.
Kingdom Hearts, Epic Mickey, things like that were coming out around that time. Yeah.
Oh god.
But apparently, a big corporate change at Disney led to the project getting canceled. And apparently, Obsidian was pretty devastated by this. Apparently, they were really proud of what they had been developing up to that point. So sad we'll never get to see that, but such is the way of the game industry.
I can
I would
imagine
love
that
to
meeting
see
where
it.
they're like, I can imagine that meeting where they're like, why are we making a video game when we can make a direct to video sequel or a
Oh my
prequel of the
god.
video? Because that's all they
Yeah.
did back then.
Yeah, Cinderella 3 goes back in time, or like
Yeah.
whoever. Yeah, Snow White surfing buddies or whatever. Yeah, what was it? This game, like, I would love to see the classes in Dwarfs. Like, is there like a dopey class and like a sleepy class? Like, I really want to see what that would be like.
Honestly, knowing Obsidian, you're probably not too far off the mark there with that level of creativity. Yeah. Another canceled project at this time was Alien Crucible, which was supposed to be an action RPG Alien game. Again, Alien, like the actual like movie property here, which was apparently first proposed by Sega. Sega got the Alien license and wanted Obsidian to develop this game for them, but then it got abruptly canceled after Obsidian had only created like a demo. I'm not sure if Sega played the demo and weren't satisfied or what, but they just cut the project after that. Um, and the third game I want to touch on here is Stormlands, which was supposed to be a third-person open-world RPG published by Microsoft, and is supposed to be a launch title for the Xbox 360 successor, which would eventually be the Xbox One. And this was canceled, and Obsidian had to lay off 20 to 30 people due to this, which is kind of rough and puts some things into context considering they are now owned by Xbox now. So Microsoft, if you screw Obsidian again, you'll be getting some hate mail from some people. But the elements of the idea behind Stormlands actually ended up forming into Tyranny, a game that we see further down the line. But okay, so this was obviously a bad time for Obsidian, but they ended up releasing their next game, Alpha Protocol, with Sega as a publisher. So this is what they ended up working on instead of the Alien game. And this was kind of like a spy RPG, gameplay wise, being a somewhat janky mix of Metal Gear Solid 4 and like Mass Effect 1. And I mean, Mass
Oh,
Effect 1 is already pretty janky, so you can imagine the jankiness that this game ended up containing.
this is the most PS3 era game I think of all time. Like, yeah, like looking at it, like it has so many things that it tries to do and it failed. Like the shooting mechanics are so like spread out, like the cursor is huge. Like how are you going to hit anything with that? The hand-to-hand combat is actually really fun and like it's like one of the best aspects of the game. But then it has like the Dragon Age 2 kind of like dialogue system where like you have a spinning wheel, but it has like extremely vague option. Like I remember playing this game and just being like, what is this trying to be? Um, and extremely vague options on the dialogue wheel where it's like, okay, uh, hesitation or doubt or positivity, and I'm like, what is he going to say? And there's a clock ticking for each dialogue choice. So like, I don't know, a lot of interesting ideas in this game, but like again, a lot of them are half baked and just in a slew of like better third person shooters in that era. Like, you know, this is like 4 years after like Gears of War and like after Uncharted, and Mass Effect was 2 years before that or 3 years before that. Like, yeah, it just felt like, I don't know, very iterative of like much better games, and like it didn't really stick the landing in anything, but like a lot of people have love for this game. Do you guys feel that way?
I
Kyle
freaking
Miller reviewing it for the site, I love the first line of his review. From the moment I first saw early footage of Alpha Protocol in action, I had an unshakable feeling that something was wrong. And later on, he's like, although they hadn't yet made an incredible game, I felt they had it in them. And it's like, this was in June, so like 4 months later, they released New Vegas. So
He was right. Wow.
yeah.
Prophetic.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm an Alpha Protocol apologist. I absolutely adore the game. That's gonna come up a lot, I think, with Obsidian. But what I think it had some like errors in messaging and some issues in understanding the moment. That made it really hard to connect with people, because the problem is the way that it does like calculation of whether you hit and your damage and stuff. That giant reticle is a factor of your skills. Everything is based off of like a turn-based RPG, what these skills have. So that giant reticle is how wide your shot might go, and as you level up like your pistol skill, for instance, it'll narrow and narrow and narrow, and then you'll basically have a dice roll on where within that circle it lands. So it's really trying to act like the turn-based RPGs they built their empire for. Empire is a strong word, but they built their name on. But none of that is really communicated that well to the player, and you start with such low skills that everything, no matter what weapon you want to use, it's going to be freaking huge. And at this point, people were starting to get to the point where like they wanted if their RPGs have some shooting in them, they want them to feel closer to shooters, not closer to a turn-based RPG. And that's because it doesn't feel great, when you're in a shooting stance, to just not be able to hit through no fault of your own. It's funny enough, people don't love that.
I thought that this was the first non D20 game that they had made, but I guess there are dice rolls behind the scenes, right?
Yeah. There's some manner of like dice roll ish calculation behind the scenes.
Huh.
And when you look at it through the right perspective, I think that there is a lot of fun to be had. But like you have to meet the game more than halfway, and I can't blame anyone who doesn't want to like go through the pain, for lack of a better term, to find that fun. But I think one of the things that it does best is your choice systems. The ways that you mold the story are way more subtle than anything else that was out at the time, where you can make decisions that seem relatively unimportant, and then in a later scene you'll see a direct result of a pretty minor decision you made. There are entire like quest lines you might not see, and it's not from you saying no like most RPGs. It's because like you made a decision several hours ago that meant that this person is in a different place, or this person isn't alive, to get that. And they're not going to like do it in a BioWare way where you still do the quest, but they make it very clear, oh well, this person's dead, so this other person is going to be the chieftain here. It's in like, you just don't even know that thing didn't exist until you go online and look it up. Which I think is really, it's against modern conventional gaming wisdom, but I think it's something unique that Alpha Protocol really did well, and it rewards multiple playthroughs. The problem is that it alienated people who wanted to do the first playthrough before they ever got to that point.
I feel like their core audience was like, hey, like, do you like Jason Bourne? Like, here's another one of those. But yeah, it was
They,
very different than that.
they actually speak to the fact that they have like 3 main classes in it, and it's like James Bond, Jason Bourne, and one other famous movie spy who I can't remember. But essentially, they divided into like, what kind of spy do you want to be?
Wes, the other secret agent was Jack Bauer from 24.
That was it.
Yeah.
I thought it might have been 24, but I couldn't summon the name, so I'm like, someone else might find it.
But as a similar Alpha Protocol apologist, Wes, that was all very well said, and I agree with you actually.
There
I
are
do
multiple of us.
Yes.
There are dozens of us.
I mean, even Obsidian really wanted to iterate on this series and make a sequel. They were really proud of their work on this, despite like its kind of messy release. It's just Sega didn't own the IP and didn't want to take another risk with them, it sounds like. But yeah, the problem here really comes down to like this was an iteration on Mass Effect 1, kind of trying to merge the shooter and RPG genre by making your shooting abilities tied to stats at a time that Mass Effect 2 had already come out. So inevitably that kind of design would just feel outdated, and with all the other kind of over ambitious and but ultimately underused elements they tried to put in this, like all the actual like spy gadgets, which barely end up getting used in the actual design of the game. Really end up falling flat and leading to something that just feels bloated and too messy. Um, but I agree the dialogue system is super engaging. Like it has that simplified personality kind of response that Dragon Age 2 has, like you explained, Matt. But here it's like instead of just like these three different personality traits, like professional, suave, or aggressive, being like tied to your role playing, the spy setting of the game made it like more inherently strategic. Like you were more like trying to pick dialogue options as a game of wits based on what you knew about different NPCs, which you would read up about in like these dossiers you received. It also had a timer to make you think quickly of like the option that would best appease the certain NPC you're talking to. And then just yeah, all that reactivity to like the different choices you make is just still like not really hasn't been matched in such a way very
Mm.
very often since. So I think
It
this is a game with huge potential.
it had the same problem though for me as I think maybe in the same year it released or like the year after. LA Noir had a similar like dialogue system,
Yep.
and it would be like like the button prompt would be doubt, right? And it's like okay, that sounds reasonable, right? Like I don't really have proof, and it's like okay, doubt, and then the character is like you're a big fat liar, and like
Yeah.
it's like whoa, like I wasn't going that hard at it, but I think a
It's
lot of what this game wanted to do, like I think in the next year from it, Deus Ex Human Revolution came out, I think in 2011. So that seemed to be like a better fulfillment of like what this game was kind of going for. A little harder sci-fi, but
Yeah, another nice thing about this game is like in 2019 it was delisted from all stores because Sega let the music license expire, didn't renew it, but it has been revived and ported to GOG last year and also been relisted on Steam. So you can
oh,
still play this game if you want to experience all its janky goodness. I'm sure modders have done some things to address that since then, though. Okay, but we have two other games released in 2010 that Obsidian worked on. Or actually, no, one in 2010, one in 2011. The first in 2010 being the big one, Fallout New Vegas. It's the game that has really defined Obsidian's legacy, I feel, and has kind of cast a shadow on them that they can't seem to get out of. It's just like feels like they're constantly being called upon to make a sequel to New Vegas that they haven't quite been able to do, and everybody's still bothering them about it. But New Vegas is an incredible game, obviously being a sort of design sequel to Fallout 3, yet a story sequel to Fallout 2, with a lot of the world building elements Obsidian had ready to apply from their work on the original Fallout 3, Fallout Van Buren. And also, they were able to repurpose assets from their canceled Alien game to kind of flesh out the world of New Vegas. I
And
imagine
I
that particularly was relevant for Old World Blues. Yep, go ahead, Jono.
and I say that I genuinely think it's a tragedy that Obsidian has never been able to get out from under the shadow of New Vegas. I
Hmm.
genuinely think it's hilarious that Bethesda has never been able to get out from under the shadow of New
Touche.
Vegas.
Yeah.
It's just really funny to me that they threw them this game as a lark, as a like, oh, we need more of this. Just give us whatever, and they gave them like and a genre and franchise defining game that Bethesda's never been able to exceed. That's gotta hurt.
and now the TV show is like aping the aesthetic of New Vegas for season 2.
It's
directly
not aping the
going.
aesthetic; it's aping the
Yeah.
friggin' game.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really fascinating. Um, if you watch this when this game was released, because it fell into the affectionately called jank era so strongly, because when it came out, the game really struggled to function, and it was months after the game released before it was
When it
um
came out, it struggled to function.
I mean, even compared to you know the future of that time. And it took a long time for people to come around and realize how good everything underneath it is, because there were the reviews, everyone talking about it at launch were like, it's hard to recommend it because we can't see what's in there. um and over time there's been this rehabilitation, this understanding that with updates, with mods, with people willing to jump in, you can see what was underneath the whole time. And New Vegas is maybe the poster boy for that for that phenomena, because as you said, it went from being like, oh god, how embarrassing was this release, the lack of resources given to Obsidian, the fact that it had to release in such a state, to this is the albatross that they're dealing with. This is like Bethesda's struggle, is dealing with the fact that are they ever going to hit New Vegas again, which is something they didn't even really, it wasn't their studio.
Another thing, Wes, that I find really funny is I genuinely think that the jank and bugginess of Fallout New Vegas is partially responsible for the reputation that Bethesda got for jank and broken games themselves.
Oh,
Because a lot of people just
absolutely.
assume that New Vegas is a Bethesda game.
Yeah.
And like Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 and obviously 76 are like, they were buggy disasters when they released, but it wasn't even close to what New Vegas was. So I
Yeah.
think it's just really funny that not only did they get all the accolades of creating the greatest Fallout game of all time, they also gave Bethesda an even stronger reputation for releasing broken games.
Like it's like the exact opposite of what you wanted to come out of this, despite the fact that you came out with an absolutely acclaimed masterpiece, darling. It's like, this is the worst way we could have reached this point.
I don't know what Todd Howard's feelings about New Vegas are, but I suspect whatever they are would be very colorful and hilarious if you get him drunk in a bar one night.
It makes me think of that clip of SpongeBob like mopping the stage and everyone's cheering, and then like Squidward tries to mop the stage and everyone is silent, and then every time SpongeBob jumps out, they're cheering again. I agree, but
I love comparing Todd Howard to Squidward, by the way.
he's very very Squidward heavy vibes. But I do think though, like this game, like people are very I love Obsidian. I don't mean to keep playing like devil's advocate, but like people are very willing to forgive Obsidian for all of their like technical mishaps, of which there are always many. But like I think just the fact that like Bethesda is now like the big studio, they're automatically the big bad studio, and people are like egging on them for every single technical mishap that they have, right? Whereas Obsidian, it's like, oh, charming, and like they'll get it done. Like just give them more time. I do think that's a little bit annoying for both developers to have that. Like, I was burned heavily by New Vegas. I got my first gaming PC, like a laptop, and I was so excited to play New Vegas, and it was rendered unplayable on my whatever graphics card I had at the time, that specific graphics card. And I was like, great. And so when I finally got my first playthrough of New Vegas, I might have mentioned on episode 461, was like, it looked equivalent to like Silent Hill 1 on PS whatever, right? Like just this foggy wasteland of like, I can't see 10 feet in front of me, but like I want to love this game so hard, and in retrospect, like now that playing New Vegas in many different variations, like amazing game, but it's a little bit unforgivable for me, like just, I don't know, the state that they are allowed to release games in.
Oh god,
Rebuttal?
if you want to know how my 2025 is going, until you said that, I was like, oh yeah, we did record a podcast of New Vegas like 3 months ago.
Yeah. But yeah, like I mean, all of that considered, like this is another reason why the PC versions of these games are just like the ones to play. If you're ever wanting to go back to experience them, or to experience them for the first time, like modding just ends up saving a lot of Obsidian's work at this time and preserving it in a way that we can better enjoy it than what the actual like material conditions of the development ended up leading to. Just like to talk about the relationship between Bethesda and Obsidian a bit more. I think it's worth mentioning here that so when Bethesda first contracted Obsidian to work on New Vegas, there was apparently a stipulation that they would only get a bonus if it reached a certain score on Metacritic. And so they were, they had the time crunch to get this game out. They put it out in the best state that it could be at that time, and because of kind of the mixed reviews, because of the issues with the technical issues, it ended up falling short 1 point of what they would have qualified them for the bonus. And this actually ended up being a factor that would lead to some of their money troubles in the next couple of years, Obsidian's. And I just think it's a really crappy move on Bethesda part to
84.
Yeah, put them to that. Yeah, it's supposed to be 85, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And this became kind of the poster child for this era of people being pissed at review scores and Metacritic, and like this. I feel like this was one of the most public examples of that bonus structure that fans actually saw and started rallying around a little bit.
I think nowadays fans are like, or quote unquote gamers are like so critical about like any technical, I keep saying technical mishap, like any kind of like bugs or like slightly dropped frame rate. So I feel like if this kind of game released nowadays, like it just wouldn't. Like you look at the launch of like Cyberpunk uh 2077, which was like a similar thing where it's like, oh, this darling studio that we all love, and then suddenly it's like they commit a major sin in the eyes of so many gamers that is unforgivable, and like they have to bend over backwards to redeem themselves. I think like maybe to a fault, fans are way more critical nowadays.
I think part of that might also be like the critique in this case was more leveled to the publisher Bethesda. I mean, like Cyberpunk was published by CD Projekt Red as well, so like in this
They
case
chose to put
there
it
was
out.
a bigger company to kind of point fingers at, while like Fallout New Vegas was turned into like a victim of these corporate processes rather than like responsible for it, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. But yeah, that takes us to the last game from this era, which is also probably the least beloved. And that's Dungeon Siege 3, which came out in 2011, a game that I don't think a lot of people talk about much when they're talking about Obsidian. But this was published by Square Enix, and it was a sequel to the first two Dungeon Siege games, which were developed by Gas Powered Games, which were pretty acclaimed computer action RPGs, known for like having a continuous world progression over level based divisions, and that's something that applies to Dungeon Siege 3 as well. But that's about all that applies to Dungeon Siege 3 as well, because ultimately it's a quite different game from the first two, being developed by a different team, being published by a different team. And what we ended up with was a pretty console friendly action RPG experience, focused more heavily on it, like campaign development, than dungeon crawling that you see in a lot of other, Diablo style action RPGs. Um, and so Obsidian, in that sense, ended up kind of trying to translate their love of narrative into what's ultimately a pretty gameplay focused game. But here, you like, for example, you choose characters instead of classes. There's a pretty, I'd say, fun ability growth system, even though it's like probably a lot more streamlined than a lot of hardcore RPG players would like. And you also have dialogue wheel interactions, which I mean, the story and dialogue in this game is fine, but it's also nothing special. But I did enjoy this game as kind of like a couch co-op experience, and it was also notably Obsidian's first real like stable release. This was like, compared to everything that came before, like at least they just shipped this game in a state that reviewers wouldn't be able to just like talk at length about bugs and things like that when it came out.
Mm.
Instead, they were kind of focusing on some of the underwhelming aspects of the game in terms of its gameplay and story, but I think it's still pretty fun.
It's a
But
very
yeah,
solid game, and like I think it was overshadowed by Diablo 3 like the next year. But I was just gonna ask, do any of you like, are you familiar with the Uwe Boll trilogy of movies based on Dungeon Siege?
Nope.
no.
Okay,
Familiar with them existing,
okay,
deliberately
yeah.
avoided.
Okay, yeah, like yeah, exactly. Yeah, like starring like Jason Statham and like Dolph Lundgren in like the sequel, I think. Yeah, just I'm like seeing that, I'm like, is this the same thing? Like, and Square Enix is attached? Like, this was like such a fever dream of a game for me and on the PS3. I'm like, who makes this game? And like, are multiple franchises sharing the same name? Like, yeah, very confusing. But awful movie, by the way. Don't watch it.
That's pretty interesting. Um, but yeah, that takes us to the end of the jank era. So, we talked about some of the specifics of these games, but I just want to open the floor here. Like, what are some of your favorites from this era? What are your, overall impressions of the work that they were doing during this period? Yeah.
I mean, New Vegas. It's kind of the game that defines this era. I know that a lot of people do like KOTOR 2, but like out of all of these games, if you asked anyone, hey, what was the someone who's not in the know, if you said, hey, what was the first game that Obsidian ever made, they'd probably say New Vegas because it's game defining, it's developer defining, it's defining for its genre, it's defining for its franchise. It's just impossible to outshine at this point.
Yeah, well, KOTOR 2 is kind of my love, my favorite in this era. You can't really deny New Vegas as a pillar of its community, I guess. It is definitely like it's still used to define everything that Obsidian does. We'll get to Outer Worlds, but how much talk was there from the press and from fans about New Vegas centered on that game and on so many of the games they release otherwise.
For me, it's got to be dwarfs. I think that no, yeah, it's New Vegas, but I do like KOTOR 2 is a close second, but I just don't have the time put into that game to like give it a fair judgment. But New Vegas is like up there among the greatest Western RPGs ever made. So yeah, definitely New Vegas.
All right, sounds like there's a consensus. I mean, like I said, for me, I think my personal favorite of this era is KOTOR 2. I just love like that game feels almost more like a Black Isle game to me than like what Obsidian would eventually become and develop into, which I think is sort of epitomized with New Vegas. And it's kind of focused on like factions and things like that. Skills unlocking like different dialogue options. I just love KOTOR 2's extremely in-depth moral kind of conversations and things like that. That's what really got me to Obsidian. And New Vegas has that in its own ways with like more kind of political focused conversations, but I love the whole tone and approach to KOTOR 2's writing. And yeah, like we were talking about with Alpha Protocol, I think that game's really cool. I think it's also like their work during this period was also just impressively mature in kind of just political awareness, philosophical kind of ambition. Um, Even Alpha Protocol like ends up being like a pretty substantial critique of like American intelligence and like post World War on Terror politics. I think like Obsidian's work is just like really like sophisticated in terms of like the thought, the sort of research they put into their stories.
They never talk down to the player, which yeah, like in an era where it's like booth babes are a thing at conventions and like like Gears of War is highlighted as like the peak of storytelling. Like this is yeah, like truly good writing and yeah, interesting morality. Yeah.
It was a different time.
It was. Yeah, it was a very brown time. Brown texture time.
All right, so that sums up our Jank era slash sequel era, because now we're getting into a new phase for Obsidian, which I am calling the Kickstarter slash Odd Jobs era. So kind of like I was getting into a bit with the whole Bethesda situation, Obsidian was in a pretty rough financial position with all their canceled projects and whatnot. And the work they were releasing here was mainly defined by these kickstarted spiritual successors to Infinity Engine games. They were really trying to get that core fan base to engage with their work again, really support them and come through in a pretty difficult period in the game industry. And also just like these other kind of odd job projects they took on, a lot of like kind of collaborative work that gave, I'm sure, extra financial support. But our first game that we're going to talk to here actually began development in the previous era in 2009, actually, which is South Park: The Stick of Truth, released on PlayStation 3 and 360. So apparently, when some South Park representatives first called Obsidian with the offer to make a South Park RPG, Obsidian just assumed it was like a joke by like another company in the same office as them. But it was legit, and we got something pretty interesting about it, I would say. So originally THQ was supposed to publish this game, but they ended up going bankrupt in 2011. Again, dark time in the game industry. And then Ubisoft eventually acquired the license to the game, and it ended up coming out in 2014, 5 years later. So here you play as a new kid that moves into the South Park town. This is just, I guess, Obsidian's only JRPG style RPG. It's just kind of like a turn-based game, pretty simple in terms of its design. It reminds me a lot of like the Paper Mario games. It has a pretty unique presentation that reminds me of Earthbound in some ways. I know Trey Parker, uh, one of the co-creators of South Park, is a known Earthbound fan, so that would check out. And yeah, this is a very simple RPG, but it's funny, it's clever, and it plays pretty smoothly, even if there's not much challenge to it. I don't know if what your guys' impression of Stick of Truth was if you got around to it.
I think it was shockingly good. Like no one expected
Yeah,
any South Park game to be any good ever. Much less this random RPG that twists with genre and does all of this bizarre, it plays as a loving parody of RPGs, which is weird ground for them to cover. Not unprecedented, but weird. I'm not a big South Park fan. The humor isn't exactly like 1-to-1 with me at nearly 40. Quite like maybe it might have hit in much much younger days. But this one, for whatever reason, despite still having some of that crude leaning into like, okay, you guys can get done with this whole segment, and I'll be happy when I can check back in. Even then, it feels like just kind of a likable, plucky RPG, turn-based RPG, that just happens to have South Park as the trappings, more so than it feeling um, like kind of the way that most licensed games go, where they just try to play the hits. This one seems to like want to do its own stuff a lot of the time, and I think that speaks to how well Obsidian deals with and loves the franchises that they work with. Whenever they have a chance to do a sequel or a licensed game, they really try to put their heart into it, and I think this is one of the better examples, weirdly enough, of them doing so.
Since South Park came out when I was 13 years old, my God, um, it's always been kind of cultural background music for me. Like I've seen a few episodes, I've seen the big episodes that are cultural, but I've never really invested anything in the show. Although I can appreciate the writing and how incredibly tight the writing is, it's just not my kind of uh, humor. That being said, a few days ago on Random, I postulated this idea that there is no such thing as a perfect game, but there is a perfect version of a game that is the perfect version of itself. And I think
Mm,
that South Park Stick of Truth is the perfect version of itself.
mm,
I
yeah.
cannot think of a way that this game could be better as a South Park game. It is written by Matt Stone and Trey Parker. It is performed by them. It looks identical to the television show. It plays like the television show. It's incredibly smart, tight writing, which again, sense of humor, not mine, but I can appreciate it for what it is. And I think this game is kind of brilliant. I really do. Like I have so much appreciation for the Stick of Truth. I enjoyed it so much, which is again surprising because I'm not a giant South Park fan. But I think this is the perfect version of itself, and I cannot think of a single way it could be better.
I have a similar feeling towards South Park. Like I'm not a huge fan of it, but it's inescapable. Like its influence on people my age and people around me, like always love it. But I do like how they incorporate like their kind of crude sense of humor into like the RPG elements and like the gameplay. Like, is it this one or like the sequel, like the Fractured Butthole that where Fractured Butthole where it's like choosing your race in the beginning like changes the difficulty in the game. Like if you're a
yeah, that's
person of
here. Yeah.
yeah, right, right. And like the class names, which I'm not even gonna say, but like there, there are like some really funny things like built into like the RPG elements. So yeah, like I think you described it perfectly, Jono, as like the perfect encapsulation of what a South Park RPG could be. But yeah, not for me, but I can yeah, like for fans, I feel very happy that they can have this game. Very weird that Obsidian made it. I did not know that
Yeah,
until
it's
yeah.
yeah, it's obviously not like the most like creatively thematically ambitious Obsidian games as we've been kind of describing them so far, but I do think it just shows Obsidian's ability to just put out a polished product when they're given proper time to do so. and that they know how to use the design and language of video games in order to adapt a licensed product, which they had tons of experience doing to this point. And I do, like you said, John, I think they just knocked it out of the park here. They knew perfectly how to take like kind of the standard RPG tropes and systems and infuse it with South Park character, which is just like exactly what the game needed to be.
Mm.
Also, shout out to the Canada section of this game, which is just when you get to Canada, it just becomes like an 8-bit style RPG with just like Dragon Quest like caves and kingdoms, and it's just
Which,
like,
to be fair, is exactly what Canada is like.
yeah, exactly. I was really impressed by the representation and
The
how accurate it
research
was.
they did, yeah.
But yeah, just I'm also like not the biggest fan. I think some South Park episodes are brilliant. I think some South Park episodes are terrible. And this was at a time that I was kind of falling away from the show in general. And then this kind of just reinvigorated my interest. It showed me that they are able to still create a product that's super engaging and that I'm down for. So yeah, this was an impressive surprise.
Yeah, they did such a good job with this game that I have absolutely no interest in playing the Fractured Butthole. I have no interest in playing it whatsoever. Don't want to, never will, because I played the Stick of Truth.
Yeah,
Now, before
actually, I felt the same way. I haven't played Butthole yet either.
is that the
I
short
made
form?
I made the same decision after a brief attempt to play the Fractured Butthole, and then like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm good.
And there's a third one, I think, like Snow Job or something. I don't even know if that's like part of the RPG series, but yeah, they've fallen back off. But
No, they gave it to another. They gave it to another company, and they didn't actually do a very good job of it.
uh,
Incidentally, on the site, Stephen Merritt. Okay, hang on, let me see. It was reviewed in 2014, and it got a 90.
ooh, that's maybe the
What?
highest score yet of Obsidian.
Wait, this was Stick of Truth?
Yeah,
Okay, wow,
Wow.
nice. I mean, like you said, it's a perfectly polished product for what it needs to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, well deserved.
Now, my
Okay,
throat is a little bit weak, but before we move on, one of you needs to do a Cartman impression. Come on.
absolutely not.
no, no.
Oh, come on. Okay, I need to take some medicine and then I can't. I'm out of commission.
I have never felt older than I do at the moment that I was asked to do a Cartman impression.
Listener, do one at home for us, please. Thank you.
We leave
Screw
this
you,
spot
Matt,
open.
I'm going home. Anyways, okay. That's time
Can we
to
please
move
move
on.
on?
Yeah.
Please, for God's sake, move on.
All right. Next is Pillars of Eternity. So this was their official first kickstarted game. So after South Park, and with the financial troubles they were getting into, they were returning to an Infinity Engine style CRPG. And it was Josh Sawyer's idea to fund it over Kickstarter, which they quickly raised over $4 million to support. This was at a time that a lot of kind of AA developers were turning towards crowdfunding as a way of supporting their work. Notably, also Double Fine crowdfunded Broken Age at this time, which was also their sort of attempt to appeal back to their original adventure game fan base through a new version of that kind of core design philosophy. And so Obsidian saw the success there and decided to do the same thing for their own kind of history. So Pillars of Eternity is actually probably like my biggest blind spot in terms of the Obsidian games I've played. I've was really excited for it when it first came out, and I bought it, and I really wanted it to work on my laptop, but my laptop was just not having it at that time. And I think I made it like a couple of hours into the game, just desperately chugging through trying to like render all these environments, and I ended up dropping it because I'm like, okay, I need to actually like play this in a more playable state, because I'm so excited for it, and I actually just never ended up getting back into that. But like the Infinity Engine games, this is kind of like based in real time with pause kind of mechanics. Has gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds. honestly, the artwork in this game with those backgrounds is just like a really beautiful painterly style. There's clearly a tons of work that went into like the lore of kind of being a fantasy world that wasn't kind of indebted to Dungeons and Dragons like their old work was. And yeah, Pillars of Eternity looks awesome, and I hope to get more into it one day.
Yeah, the fact that they were like they had finally broken free from publishers' demands and even like the licensing, requirements of like it's D&D, which is very open and like explores a lot of dark themes. It's like I've read that they were finally allowed to kind of run free with like things that they've always wanted to write about. So this is a one of their games that I haven't played, but it's very much on my radar just because I want to see what they can do writing fantasy however they want to write it. That's really intriguing to me. But interesting, like Kickstarter story, right? Like in a post Mighty Number Nine world, I think I read that at the time in 2015 or 14, whenever it was funded, it was the highest funded game um, up until that point. So
Mm.
wow, there is a hunger for CRPGs.
Funny you mentioned that. There was an article a couple of weeks ago from Josh Sawyer. He was it back in October. He was giving a talk at GCAP in Australia, and apparently the reason why CRPGs and presumably adventure games and those things went out of style, vanished, is because retailers were telling the developers that they don't sell. We don't want them. They just don't sell. Uh, and that was bullshit. They wanted first person shooters. They wanted like to sell every single thing on their wall. Like these things sold perfectly fine, but the demand was so high for other more, I guess, violent games that they just told them. The exact quote here is, "We asked if we could see the research, and they basically told us to trust them."
Oh, thanks, Half-Life. Yeah.
Yeah, and like a few years later, they get a record breaking Kickstarter. Yeah, no demand, my ass.
Yeah, I think that there is a direct line drawn between like Pillars of Eternity and the success of Baldur's Gate 3.
Mm.
This
Absolutely.
this
Mm.
absolutely did a lot to prove the viability of this style of game. Not just because yes, there were clearly still people who wanted it, but because an Obsidian with resources is something to behold. So what they put together works so stinking well in ways that like people who go back and try to play like the original Baldur's Gate games, which are wonderful games and have stories that stand up in a lot of ways, but can just be a little bit harder to process. Whereas Pillars of Eternity, I played it and it kind of reinvigorated my interest in computer RPGs after years of it having laid dormant. Just because there are all of those little touches of a modern developed game, all of the thoughtful pieces of lore and role playing and gameplay that Obsidian does so dang well, that this game ended up being um, not just like pretty well beloved within its genre, but showing the viability of it on a broader scale. And this whole world, the Pillars of Eternity world, because of the success of this game, still is standing up as an institution. As recently as Avowed this year, they're still dealing with
Mm.
this as a growing, viable setting that they can use for all kinds of different games.
I love that they're releasing like novellas set in this universe. Like all I want them to do is release like Fallout novels and Planescape Torment novels. Like that would be my dream.
Mm. Yeah, I know Josh Sawyer's a big like history guy. He's always like super interested in like lore and things like that, and in-depth world building. And he was really excited at this opportunity. This is the second main project he was like sole director on after New Vegas, and he was just really eager to create an extremely complex world with a unique history. And I think just based on my limited hours with this game that it's incredibly successful. Like it's clear that the amount of detail that went into building this world, and that it stands out from like just regular D&D properties as well. Okay, so we're gonna look into some side projects here because that was also part of Obsidian's work at this time. I don't want to get super into them unless anybody here wants to. But there's basically three projects released around 2015, 2016 that Obsidian had some hand in. So the first was Skyforge, which was an MMO developed by Alod's team, which Obsidian was a collaborator on. There was Armored Warfare, which was a free to play vehicular combat game that they co developed with another studio, where you're apparently in this post nuclear world where people have migrated into a Badlands kind of area to get away from corporate control. Honestly, sounds kind of interesting in terms of its premise, but I'm not sure how it actually plays. And then there was Pathfinder Adventures, which was a entry in the Pathfinder, tabletop kind of series, which was a mobile strategy game. So that is the extent of my knowledge about any of these three games, which I just learned about as I was preparing for this episode. But if anybody else has anything else to share, please do.
So I think everyone on this podcast knows at this point that I've got to give a brief little thing on Pathfinder Adventures because it ties so closely to the history of Obsidian. Realizing that they were the ones who developed this game was kind of fascinating to me. Because this is a game based on a tabletop card game, which is kind of like a campaign-based RPG series called the Pathfinder Adventure card game. They would have multiple boxes. Those boxes would each contain like one of the Pathfinder adventure paths for the actual Pathfinder tabletop RPG, but it was all card based. These mechanics were that you had locations to travel to. You had to delve through decks to potentially get loot that you added to your deck for the campaign or fight monsters. There was some dice rolling involved. It really felt like this encapsulation of a tabletop RPG. I played several campaigns with my friends when back before the days of having kids, and it was one of my favorite tabletop experiences. And then Obsidian comes along and takes the same core gameplay that has a lot of like relatively like good tabletop RPG systems, which is very much within Obsidian's wheelhouse, and translates it so that it works as a video game, not just one to one like most board game adaptations, but included aspects that you could only have work really well in video games, like purchasing loot and having one player control multiple party members and all of the quality of life that comes along with that. So it turns from this big social experience to kind of a solo RPG experience. And either way, it still completely works because Obsidian is so good at figuring out, well, this is our target now, this is our audience now, how do we cater to that while not losing the spirit of the original? And I think it's like a fascinating little microcosm of Obsidian kind of doing what they do best. I've still got it installed on my phone and fire it up every once in a while. I think it's on PC and everything as well. If you're a tabletop fan, if you love Pathfinder, and if you love Obsidian, there's actually like some interesting stuff there. Even though these being written as adventure modules, your story's not going to get that traditional Obsidian like depth. I think it speaks to Obsidian taking what they do best and applying it to something outside their wheelhouse, which I think is just cool.
That actually sounds pretty cool, Wes.
Yeah.
You might have actually sold me on at least checking it out. Is it a
It's
free to play,
surprising.
or is it you gotta
Last I checked, I bought the full version ages ago, but I think that they have a free to play version where you can play like a couple of scenarios and then you can buy like the full adventure paths.
okay, right on. I mean, I love hearing that Obsidian, even when they're just like struggling to survive, taking on just like these side projects, that there's still like a lot of passion and professionalism that goes into their work. I think that that's just really goes to show like what a sophisticated, experienced studio they are. But we'll move on from there if nobody else has any comments on these three oddities. So the next game that they worked on was actually Tyranny, which was kind of developed concurrently with Pillars of Eternity, with a much smaller kind of B team. It was a lot of the devs that apparently were working on Stick of Truth ended up coming to work on Tyranny, and they said that their work with the South Park creators and the content of that game gave them a lot of experience working with kind of crude humor and cynical kind of scenarios, which is very much what Tyranny is kind of focused on, being a game where essentially the premise behind the world is that evil has already been victorious and that there aren't very many glimmers of hope to overcome this kind of global spanning conquest that you're immediately thrown into at the start of the game. And this is just a testament to Obsidian creating interesting premises for interesting role playing. Where in this game, again, it's not like getting away from binary moral systems and all of that. Instead, here you're kind of asked to choose what kind of evil you're most okay with, which is a really interesting premise because like a lot of the games where that have evil options, I find players normally don't gravitate towards them. And in fact, like if you look at the statistics with achievements and things like that, most players don't engage with any evil paths. So Tyranny is just like, all right, what if every path is at least a little bit evil, and kind of has you role play within that context. So Tyranny was also the last game Chris Avallone was involved with before leaving in 2015. So he wasn't at the forefront of this game's development, but I think that kind of just general idea feels very much in keeping with what he liked most about RPGs. And yeah, the game feels unfinished in some ways. It's clear it had less resources and time than Pillars of Eternity. It doesn't look nearly as nice, but it's still quite a compelling release. And then finally, we have Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, released in 2018, which was crowdfunded on Fig, which was a platform Obsidian and Double Fine put out together, and received all its crowdfunding within a day. So obviously a successful thing. People wanted more work in the Pillars of Eternity universe, except here the focus was more on kind of seafaring and traveling islands, having a bit of a pirate vibe in comparison to the uh, world of the original. And so that's everything from this era. So with that, other than kind of what we've talked about already, anybody else played, Pillars of Eternity 2? Have impressions of Tyranny? Interested to hear your thoughts.
I tried playing Tyranny. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I'm too good a person.
What are you trying to say about
have trouble doing the dark side path, that kind of
impossibility of doing the dark side path. Tyranny is, I think, a genius game. I think it's a great idea. It actually reminds me, it came out long after it, but it kind of reminds me of a comic book from the early 2000s from Mark Waid called Empire.
Oh, wow.
And
Good pull.
Empire, you know it, Wes?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, Empire, it's basically like a Doctor Doom-esque supervillain actually wins and takes over the world, and he sets up his own little Empire regime, and like all of the supervillains of the world are now like basically ministers in his government. And it's a book about the power plays and them trying to fight and basically them trying to survive and people trying to survive in a world where evil is the default. Evil wins. And that's sort of what Tyranny, as I understand it, is. It's what is it like to be a person in a world where evil is just a matter of survival? It's just you have to be evil in order to just survive. How do you navigate that? What levels of evil do you go to? It asks a lot of really interesting questions, and I could not do it. If I was living in a world of evil, I would be dead so fast. Yeah. That being said, I think it was a genius idea.
I think this is a really interesting, like, for lack of a better term, as a product, Tyranny forms a really interesting narrative in the world. Because yes, this is a pretty unique concept. It's really hard to get people into, like, you are unabashedly evil, and we're not playing this as like a dungeon keeper style joke or something. No, this is, you are dealing with complex morality in not even a morally gray, like a morally completely dark world. And how do you cope with that? It had a lot of unique little gameplay aspects, but I think maybe the more interesting part is Chris Avallone's involvement. As starting to get this going, there are parts where you can see a little bit of influence from Planescape Torment in this game, just in terms of like the complex morality and trying to tell a tale that is pretty non traditional and is trying to ask you to take steps outside your comfort zone. But then Chris Avallone left and worked on a more direct spiritual successor in Torment Tides of Numenera, based on the Cypher system. You know, it was based on a tabletop game. It was a much closer setting to something like Planescape, and it was meant to really evoke a lot of that. And it came out actually just 3 months after Tyranny, and I feel like kind of ate Tyranny's lunch, because instead of being this like morally dark, it led more into that morally ambiguous kind of space that people were more interested in playing in. It had this gameplay system, and almost like, you know, Tyranny was an attempt to make the Pillars of Eternity system into the Infinity engine. Like, how can we take this gameplay style and extrapolate it out to make a whole bunch of games out of it? And the fact that it didn't like pop off quite so high, it still had some moderate level of success, but definitely wasn't wasn't like a Pillars of Eternity situation for Obsidian. I feel like kind of arrested that process. So there's this interesting interplay in just the presence of Chris Avalon in these kind of parallel development processes um, kind of affects Obsidian's history after this point.
They've always like played with like the darker side of the moral compass that like the larger publishers are not, or larger developers are not willing to go to. So this sounds really intriguing to me. Not a PC player myself, so I haven't played it, but I'm looking at the site now, and like their official site, the tagline is "Sometimes evil wins," and on the official site they have like a collection of 6 short stories that you can read. Like, so I love that even for like a relatively one-off game, they build out like this deep lore, and like, you can tell that they love to write, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you can never accuse Obsidian of half-hearting the story,
No,
the
no.
lore, I guess, in broader terms.
Yeah, I guess I'm not as good of a person as the rest of you because I really enjoyed my time with Tyranny. But I think it's mainly just a testament to kind of what I said in my introduction part, that like Obsidian knows how to get you to role play, how to truly like try to identify and develop a character. And so like when I'm deciding which form of evil I'm trying to be in Tyranny, I'm I'm thinking of it more as like I'm writing a character. What would be like the most interesting type of character to make? And I think I even like modeled my protagonist and kind of like my moral philosophy in this game after Delta Hyrule from Final Fantasy
Ooh.
Tactics, where I was like trying to make kind of the more unifying kind of decisions of like the people under the rule of Kairos, the great tyrant. But it was ultimately more out of like self-interest, and I don't know, I just had such a good time role playing this character and like having conversations with these companions and seeing the reactivity in this game, because this is not the sprawling epic Pillars of Eternity is, but it does have a nice amount of reactivity in terms of like its dialogue. It's like not as sprawling, but it is quite deep in terms of the role playing it gives you.
Well, one thing that we've not mentioned thus far is like Obsidian games by average are like shorter than your typical RPG. Like they're usually around 20 hours long, I'd say. So they do lend themselves to replaying and like trying out like, I'm going to be a little bit naughty this time, or I'm going to be a cannibal this time, or like more so than any other RPG game. Like, I wouldn't I'm not ever planning on revisiting Fallout 3, I think. But like I've played New Vegas so many times so I can try each faction just as an example, right? So yeah, 100%. Like I can commit 20 hours to being a bad guy, but committing 100 hours, like that's a lot bigger of an ask, I think.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I
You need a little
appreciate.
bit of good as a treat in that case.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's the saying it that way almost puts it as like a twist on the Mass Effect formula of you're working within different morality of being the hero. Working within different shades of morality and being the villain is kind of interesting, but it requires that detachment of you have to be someone who can write a good villain and separate yourself from that, and that's from those actions, are they compelling versus are they morally just? That's so much harder to do in an RPG and in a video game than it is in a novel or something where you can separate yourself from that character a little easier.
Mhm.
Especially by nature of being evil, you shut yourself out of quest lines and character like companions and things like that. Just in every game, it's like I play the good guy because I want to experience everything.
Yeah, you're
And
being
usually,
trained not to do what this game's asking you to do.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really great insights from you all. Did anybody play Deadfire? Because I certainly didn't, and it looks really cool. So I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts on that one.
Not a ton of it, although I do think it's kind of a fascinating example. Like the fact that they pulled in a whole Critical Role pack, and Critical Role being at its height when this happened means that
Hmm.
um, there is tie to like the greater tabletop RPG community with Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. It's got a lot of interesting design and like how it handles quests, how it handles your crew, how it handles being like this seafaring adventure that I think in some ways takes fans of the original, like you have to follow that leap with them from like a traditional RPG adventure to like this is a swashbuckling kind of experience, which can be hard for some people to follow. But clearly, it had connections to the greater tabletop um, community, which I think is uh, it's almost like trying to reflect on what made Baldur's Gate and like these older, based on D&D RPGs so great, and kind of trying to backwards engineer that, um, which I think is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I was very curious about like its change of setting because it just seems so different from like the mystical, mythical tone of the original game. So yeah, it's I like how they tried to branch off, but I wouldn't be surprised if it alienated some fans of that first game.
I
Um,
do think too, like because of Pillars of Eternity 1, it set off this boom of CRPGs, like, this revival that for me, I kind of got a little bit lost in the sauce of like, okay, you have Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, and then you have, there were a lot of similar, or like Wasteland coming back. Like there were a lot of games like that that were just, it was a little bit oversaturated at the time, I think. But now that I'm like, okay, this is the Obsidian one, that's what I want to play. Like knowing
Mhm.
that now.
I think Wes, you were explaining before, like it's just the ability here to adapt the style of gameplay from those Infinity Engine games, but just streamline it at least so it's not like you're not as bogged down in kind of D&D systems. It feels more modern, it feels more accessible, and they've even figured out how to translate these games into decent console controls. Like that's just a great thing cuz yeah, I still have yet to play a an entire CRPG on my Switch, but I'm definitely intrigued and interested in doing so. So maybe I'll do that with one of these games.
That's how I played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and I'm like, it took me about 10 hours to like wrap my head around the controls. It's really, and it's like, you better not put that game down for like more than a day or two because you're gonna forget all that. Like it's not that inviting on console, but definitely
Yeah,
like
they did their
playable.
best. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe with the Switch too, you can like do a mouse. I don't know.
All right, so that brings us to the last era we're going to cover, and I think there's only one thing to call this era, and that is the Microsoft era. Because in 2018, Microsoft announced that they were going to acquire Obsidian. This was at a time that they were acquiring a lot of different studios, including Double Fine as well, which was in a similar sort of crowdfunding based position with Obsidian, but I'm sure having a more stable offer must have been pretty appealing. And so Obsidian took them up on it. So the first game we're going to cover here was actually in development before the Microsoft acquisition and wasn't even published by Microsoft. It was published by Private Division, and that is The Outer Worlds, which came out in 2019 on PC and consoles. And this was, as we alluded to earlier in the episode, a spiritual successor very much to the Fallout series, which was actually led by two of the original Fallout games creators. Leonard Boyarsky was co director and writer, and Tim Kaine was co director. And you can definitely see a lot of that Fallout influence on here in terms of just the um, kind of overall premise of player is woken up kind of into a new sort of world, being unfamiliar with that new world. Here you are in cryogenic sleep, and you wake up to a world that is um, a post space colonization world where a lot of the colonizing was done by mega corporations. And there's a lot of very colorful sort of world building that comes out of that, heavy focus on satire, really unique art direction. But ultimately, even though there's a lot of kind of the adaptive, extensive dialogue choices you get in a traditional Obsidian game, gameplay wise, this was kind of Bethesda light in its design a lot of the ways. You didn't have a continuous world like you do in Bethesda games. So it was divided into planets, more small zones, not as much focus on simulation, but that core kind of Fallout 3, New Vegas sort of gameplay style was very much the basis here. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about Outer Worlds before we get into the other ones, but feel free.
Yeah, sure. I reviewed it What did I give this thing again? Let's see here. 2019, before times. I gave it a 92. Um, yeah, it's down by that. I really enjoyed the Outer Worlds. I thought it was a very, very good RPG that aspired to things that it couldn't quite reach. Um, which is not the same thing as saying it is bad or not good. Um, I thought the satire was very, very sharp. I thought it was very funny in places. I thought I thought the art design is just utterly stunning, with each particular faction or corporation having very, very different looks, fashion, styles. I thought the factions themselves were very well identified. Everyone had their own governance, their own ethos. Um, I really liked the Outer Worlds. I did not think it was New Vegas. Um, and not just because it wasn't an open world. It was because it's, a series of zones essentially that are, I guess, walled gardens, very big walled gardens. Um, I really liked it. I liked the first DLC more than I liked the second one. The first one being the mining planet, and the second one being the murder mystery. I don't know why I didn't like the murder mystery. I would have thought I would, because that's really my genre.
Feels up your alley.
Yeah, it really does. But I did not enjoy it. What did I give it? I gave it a 79, which is still not a bad score. But yeah, I think they achieved what they were trying to do here, which was basically a proof of concept, a very expansive proof of concept, but still like a basis they could build things upon. We'll talk about whether or not they succeeded in that in a few minutes, probably.
I feel like this game continues something that they kind of started in Pillars of Eternity 2, but that they really put at the forefront with the Outer Worlds, which is Obsidian had spent so long working on sequels and working on IPs and working on a basis from someone else, that they'd followed kind of the Fallout / Bethesda tradition with anything that they made that kind of hewed close to it. Oh, this has to be big. This has to be simulation. You have to be able to steal anything. You have to be able to have massive interactivity. You have to have giant open worlds, which can work very well. But for my tastes, I like the idea of a slightly smaller scale, more densely packed. I don't need all of the customization in the world if the choices that I have really matter. Um, I want a slightly smaller scale experience that has that same kind of depth. It's that whole brevity is the soul of wit attitude going into it that I think Outer Worlds really starts to land. And I think this is kind of the direction that Obsidian has been going in this Microsoft era. And I kind of want to see them keep following it through, because I think while they've definitely had success with it, I think that like the big, like, oh my god, this is why Bethesda is in some ways slipping, and this is what can replace it, works really well. Because I don't like, personally, as primarily a console gamer, walking into a store and feeling like I'm accidentally going to steal something and have the guards on me. And I don't like these like janky, weird interactive experiences so much as I like experiencing this story. But I still like that kind of slightly open viewpoint. I like it being a little simulation as a treat, not like deep down, how do I break this game? And I think
you can say Oblivion, Wes. It's all right. You can say Oblivion.
Yeah. I was dancing around that one a little bit. And I think Outer Worlds is kind of one of the first games to really do that. What if Bethesda with an editor kind of energy.
Yeah.
And since that is, I don't want bigger games. I want smaller, more intimate, more densely packed games. And I think Outer Worlds really hits that. A lot of the worlds that you go into, you don't have to walk far to find something else to do. If you go into a town, more and more of these buildings have purpose. They have quests, they have shops, they have something worth going into them for, rather than just like, okay, here's 20 different houses you can walk in and steal the pillows for your pillow collection that you're going to put in the other house that you stole. I don't want to, kill every RP or kill every NPC, because that's not, to Jono's earlier point, that's not something morally I really enjoy doing, even in a video game. I think
Although
there's
you
room.
can in this.
Hmm?
Although you can in this.
You can in this, but it feels less like feels less like I'm gonna do it on accident, or like I'm gonna enrage someone without intending to. It feels like there are guardrails on those
Mm.
abilities, for
Mm.
lack of a better term. And I like that a little bit. And I know that there's room for both. There are definitely people who prefer the Bethesda way, and I'm like, yeah, more power to you. I'm just glad that someone's doing a similar type of game that has, I don't know. It feels a little bit more like they're giving me some tracks that I can stay on if I want to.
I really like this game, like Outer Worlds. I think as a fan of New Vegas, and like so many people are fans of New Vegas, I think this delivers on all the things that New Vegas fans um, like quest design and like the freedom to go about solving quests like how you want to. Um, the world size, like let's say of like the first big planet, which takes up like almost half the game if you let it. That's about the size of like the strip in New Vegas, like with these various factions, and like there are so many outcomes of how you can solve things, and like you can go the late stage capitalist route, you know what I mean? Like the corporate shill. You can go the psychomaniac. Like I do really enjoy that. And like it makes me like as I'm playing it, I'm like, ooh, like I can see what they're setting up here. Like I have that potential to do a bad thing or whatever. And I haven't replayed it, but I could very much see myself replaying this game soon. But yeah, I think like the gunplay is really solid, and I'm not a huge fan of the satire. Like I think Zach on the retro episodes about New Vegas brought up a similar point about how like their version of satire is like everyone is stupid and like the world is awful. Like it's a little like too negative for me, I guess, or like I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it. Like, but there are like some funny moments, and I think the companions are like the most in-depth companions that Obsidian has ever made. And
I love Ellie.
yeah, like and they are like really wholesome for the most part and like funny and like interesting, and like it's a little bit limited by the fact that they're all humans, whereas New Vegas you have like a very colorful cast, but like they have very in-depth like motivations and everything, and it's fun to get to the bottom of their side quests. But the problem with like a lot of Obsidian games is the freedom, the free nature of the narrative is like none of them have any weight in the overarching narrative, so it's like they don't feel that consequential. Like it's like I don't have to help out the priest seeking whatever, right? Like all these characters. Um, so I think that's one of the weaknesses that it has. But yeah, I think if anyone likes New Vegas and hasn't played this game, like give it a shot because it's one of the best Obsidian games that they've made. Maybe the second or third best.
Yeah, this is a game I still wrestle with my feelings on it because on paper it was exactly what I wanted Obsidian to make, pretty much being a spiritual sort of successor to New Vegas and the original Fallout, even with its two of its core developers being the leads. But I think like this is a case where like I love Outer Worlds world, I don't love Outer Worlds the game. And what I mean by that is I enjoy the way the world's portrayed, I enjoy the dialogue branches, I enjoy the characters. But then when all that in between of just like walking around the open world, engaging in kind of serviceable like gunplay and going through kind of pretty bland levels, it lost me in a
Hmm.
lot of ways in those sections. And I almost wish that the Outer Worlds was another entry in kind of their isometric Infinity Engine style throwbacks like Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny. I would love a version of the Outer Worlds that played more like that and played more like a isometric kind of Fallout revised in a new sort of context. I think that would be the version of the game that would hit for me, because the other problem with the Outer Worlds that I couldn't help hold against it is that this is no fault of it, but it came out the same year as Disco Elysium, and Disco Elysium was basically what I would have hoped Obsidian would go on to make, like that kind of game, which is a lot more focused on really deep conversations, dialogue choices, unique sort of inversions, subversions of the like tabletop role playing. Um, and so yeah, Outer Worlds is a game I still have complicated feelings about. But
It's
yeah,
sorry, like Disco Elysium is like so much like Planescape Torment as well, right? It's like very much in the vein of that, I think. So it's funny like the interplay between them.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, after Outer Worlds, we get another game that was developed before the Microsoft acquisition, but is still uh pretty unique. Again, a little kind of an oddball in terms of Obsidian's catalog, and that is Grounded, which ended up coming out in 2022, even though it was in early access as early as 2020. So this was like a playful survival game sort of concept, where it's just like, okay, what if we take the survival genre that was really popping off at the time of the pandemic, let's be real, but made it like through like the kind of framework of a movie like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, kind of having like a sort of like B movie playful energy to it. Very
I thought it was
cartoonish.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids when I first saw the trailer
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah, like an actual adaptation for real.
I was like, wow,
Um,
that's really cool. Disney is
Just
putting out. Oh no, they're not. Okay.
just fit into Obsidian's licensed body of work very nicely.
Yeah.
They dipped into that dwarves relationship that they had all those years ago.
We've been waiting to do this for real.
Finally, Dwarfs is back.
But smaller than ever.
Yeah, there's the tagline.
Jesus.
There's the tagline right there.
Oh my god. Um, so yeah, if you love like gathering, crafting, all of that, I think this is a very fun version of that kind of gameplay loop. There's not as much narrative intrigue here as I think they were promising. In terms of like the release, they're like, oh yeah, it's a survival game simulation, but there's still like gonna be Obsidian storytelling, and there isn't really. It's like it's there, it's minimal, it's good enough, but that's not really what it's about. What it's about is this kind of general vibe and aesthetic of being like a teenager shrunken and navigating this world of their backyard where a lot of the habits of just insects are being simulated. Um, Spiders are actually genuinely scary, and I hate encountering them. Um, there's even like an arachnophobia accessibility setting that if you have arachnophobia and don't want to battle with giant spiders, you can make them basically look blocky, comical sort of messes, which is funny. And yeah, that was Grounded, which was I guess a successful, interesting, but kind of weird entry in Obsidian's catalog. Then we go on to my favorite game from this era, Pentiment, which also came out in 2022 on PC and Xbox, eventually being ported to PlayStation and Switch a couple of years later, as is kind of the case with these games during the Microsoft era. So this was a small passion project led by Josh Sawyer, post Deadfire. I remember listening to an interview where Sawyer said he had a bucket list of 3 games he wanted to be a lead on. He wanted to lead a Fallout game, which he eventually did with New Vegas. He wanted to do a fantasy epic, which he did with Pillars of Eternity. And he wanted to do a piece of historical fiction, which he accomplished with Pentiment, which is in its design kind of looks like a point and click style classical adventure game, but the gameplay isn't really about puzzle solving. It's a lot more focused on just dialogue choices and developing your main character, Andres Mailer, with kind of light character building elements, choosing like his personality quirks, his history, and things like that, all factoring into the type of decisions you have on offer. And so you're playing as a journeyman painter in 16th century Bavaria, and there's kind of this murder mystery around a monastery kind of going on. And this is just a beautiful, painstakingly authentic game to trying to adhere to the visual art, the writing, the typography of its time. And it really does have kind of just like an indie game passion project sort of feel that I absolutely fell in love with.
Yeah, this is, in my opinion, the best Obsidian game that they've ever made. It distills like all the things that I think like the like if you scrub back for 2 hours, like the thing that we always enjoy about Obsidian games is like the writing and the dialogue, I feel. And this is like all that, all gas on the writing, right? And in some ways it has failings as like a game. Um like I mentioned I reviewed it this March for RPG Fan. And there are some things about like, the menu systems or about like the lack of a dialogue log things like that. But like I think that it requires you, just by limiting itself to like these simple speech bubbles, it requires you to pay such careful attention to the dialogue. And unlike games like Telltale's The Walking Dead, where it's like, oh, Clementine will remember that, this game remembers everything that you say or don't say, and it will come back to bite you 25 years later in the story, in a way that was so living and breathing that I'd never seen in dialogue in a game before. Like, I truly think this is maybe the best written game ever, or standing toe to toe with like Disco Elysium. Those are the two that come to mind. Yeah, this game is incredible, and even though like my review, I think I gave it like an 89 or something like that, because of like I know it has a limited appeal. I joked before we recorded, like, this is maybe the best game I've ever read. And like it can't function as a book because there is like this choose your own adventure element to it. But one of the things that it fails at is like it hinges so much on like your mystery solving and your deduction and your accusation of like who is the murderer in the Benedictine Abbey. But I'm losing track of what I'm gonna say. This game like makes me think about a lot of things, but it does bottleneck itself. Like there are like 3 acts in the game, I would say, and it bottlenecks and it kind of reduces the player choice, so that there's really no multiple endings, which is kind of rare for Obsidian, I feel like. Um, so there are elements to it, and like there are a few half-baked elements in it as well. But like in terms of dialogue, which is what it is really on Showcase, this is like gaming dialogue at its very, very best. This is fiction dialogue at its very, very best, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. This is like up there with Disco Elysium. I think I would put this second in terms of just like the game that just best immersed me in just like pure dialogue. And Yeah, I absolutely love it. But we'll move on a bit more and then kind of open up the discussion to the entire era. So next is Avowed, which is if Outer Worlds was Obsidian's answer to Bethesda-style Fallout, this is their answer to Bethesda-style Elder Scrolls. So this game was based in the Pillars of Eternity universe. A lot of its narrative setup is apparently following from Deadfire, but from what I know about Pillars of Eternity, that this game has less kind of it's less mythical in kind of its tone. It's kind of more playful and modern in kind of its writing, which is something that some people has had some fault with. I don't think it completely worked for me, but I do think that there are interesting things going on here narratively. But really, what I like best about this game is its zone-based world design, which again, it's not open world, but it does divide its world into these distinct zones, which I think is done much better than it was in Outer Worlds. This was a game where my best enjoyment out of it was just like seeing things on the map, points of interest, walking towards it, engaging with the very good first person parkour elements, and just getting like a little treasure reward and proceeding like that. So I think Avowed, for its faults you could identify in terms of storytelling, is quite a polished and nice playing game. And then we have Grounded 2, which is in early access this year. But since it's in early access, I don't know if we want to spend too much time on it. This is a sequel to Grounded, obviously. But that's not the only sequel that Obsidian developed this year. Their most recent entry is, of course, The Outer Worlds 2, which is supposed to be just kind of like a bigger, arguably better version of Outer Worlds, question mark. I haven't personally played it, but I've heard kind of some mixed things in terms of whether it truly iterates in improving the Outer Worlds foundation or not. So yeah, that's the Microsoft era. Anybody have some thoughts they want to share on Obsidian's work here?
I think that this is such a fascinating era for Obsidian, not just in the fact that they're taking more risks and doing more original things, but a lot of the stuff that they're making has a lot of promise, even if nothing has hit like the big, massive hit that they're looking for yet. I think both Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2 are really fascinating games. I've yet to play Pentiment. It's installed, waiting for me. I was trying to get to it before this recording, but it didn't quite happen. But I did get a chance to spend some time with Avowed earlier this year. Really love, a similar to how Outer Worlds speaks with Fallout, Avowed kind of speaks with Elder Scrolls in kind of a similar manner that I think is really interesting. I'm really excited to get my hands on Outer Worlds too after the first one was so dang good. And some of the changes I've seen, it seems like there's a little bit of mixed reception, but a lot of the things that it does it does well, and a lot of the changes that have been made appeal to me specifically, so I think I'm gonna have a blast with it, once I get to it.
Okay, so Jono, I know you actually had some time to play Outer Worlds 2 recently. So what were your impressions on that? And I mean, feel free to touch on Avowed and Grounded as well.
Yeah, I never played Grounded. My thoughts on Avowed are I could not get into it. Don't know why. Should have been able to. I recognize that it's a good game. It might have just been my headspace at the time. I had a weird 2025. Might try it again in 2026. Um, but Read the Outer Worlds 2 I finished 2 days ago. Um, and really enjoyed it. Um, I don't think it is quite as good as the first game.
Hmm.
It is. That's again not saying that's a bad game. I was just looking at Metacritic, which I can't stand, but Metacritic is I understand that people are like, oh, reviews for Outer Worlds 2 have been mixed. And I'm like, yeah, but reviews for Outer Worlds 1 was also mixed. Like 85 review score, 7.8 user score. So that's for Outer Worlds 1, and Outer Worlds 2 is 83 critic score and 6.8 user score. And when you account for anti-woke review bombing, that pretty much bumps it up to a 7.8. I really enjoyed it though. Everything that had the Outer Worlds had going for it, art style, interesting characters, some good faction work, interesting world spaces, all that. That's all still here. Um, Zek in his review post pointed out quite a few things which I absolutely am not going to disagree with. Some of the quest design is a little bit, a lot of fetch questing in this game. But there is one thing that I wanted to call attention to, and because it's something that I've been saying that Fallout should do for years. I've been saying this. There are radio stations in the Outer Worlds too, and they have all original music. Each of the three main factions of the game has their own radio station. And on that radio station, it's their own songs, their own genres of music, their own styles, their own spoken word sections. And I've always thought that Bethesda should just do this. It boggles my mind that they never have done it. Uh, I mentioned this on the New Vegas episode that on my last run of New Vegas, I used a mod that let me create my own radio station, and I dumped in the complete works of Postmodern Jukebox. And oh my god, it worked so well. It was so immersive. And the fact that Outer Worlds 2 has sort of done that is amazing. The soundtrack is so good. There's a song about one of the factions in it are mathematicians. Essentially, they are obsessed with order and figuring out the grand plan of the universe. And because of that, their radio station is entirely based around like math and logic and songs about math and logic. And there's an entire song about the Fibonacci sequence, which is this insanely good earworm. Auntie's Choice, which is, if you played the first one, you had Spacer's Choice, Auntie Cleo. There was a violent merger, so now it's Auntie's Choice. All of the songs on there are all 1940s, 50s retro pastiche, swing numbers, jazz, stuff like that. But the difference being, of course, that they are all actually commercial jingles. And the satire there is pretty sharp. Some of the songs. The Protectorate, who is the main antagonistic force in the game, like all of their music, they have a lot of marches and things like that, which really kind of reflect the authoritarian nature of their society. I think that the soundtrack of this game is just awesome. I'm such a big fan. Voice acting is solid again, and much like the first game, massive fan of the companions in this game. A difference between the Outer Worlds and the Outer Worlds 2 in terms of the companions are that the companions in this game really, really don't like each other. Like, it is not a harmonious ship at all. They do not get along. Their factions, they're all from different factions, and they are all I wouldn't say they're at each other's throats, but they're tolerating each other at best. Um, things can change when change. Things can change once you do their companion quests, But for the most part, yeah, the people on this ship not a fan of each other. And that being said, I just really like them as the psychopath assassin cultist is I really like her. Um, she's a fun character. I see my favorite character in both games seems to be the woman with short hair. My favorite companion, and I think she's awesome. Um, Niles, your companion from the start, who's like another member of your crew from the start. Really interesting character, some great character development there. I really enjoyed the Outer Worlds too. I really did. I don't think that it is better than the first game.
Hmm.
I just don't. I wish I did. I don't. It feels like more of the same, which is not a bad thing. It looks a hell of a lot better. Art style is the exact same, but like the way the graphics are just much better, especially facial animation. And it is a completely standalone sequel, by the way, to anyone out there. If you're wondering, oh, should I play the Outer Worlds first? It'll give you some context, but there are no characters in the Outer Worlds who appear in the Outer Worlds 2 at all. It appears in it. It's an entirely different colony. So you could start this game and enjoy it and have a great time with it, and then go back to the Outer Worlds if you wanted to, without any problems. But yeah, I think it's a pretty successful game. And I think a lot of the people who were like, "Oh, it's so mixed," it's like that's exactly what was said about the first game. I remember the
Yeah.
discourse during it because I was
Yeah.
involved in the discourse during it. It's a good game. It just is, in my opinion. I mean, some opinions differ. Zach really disliked it, and there are a lot of people out there who also disliked it. And then there are, of course, the people who are just review bombing it because they think it's woke. Those are
Mm.
Those are the three factions of people who think of people who have opinions about the Outer Worlds too. And
And
I am a fan of the first one, and the second one and the third one can go to hell.
is it relatively polished compared to like Obsidian games, or?
Actually, yes, I didn't experience. Zek experienced quite a few bugs. In my experience, they most of them have been patched out by now. I only experienced two significant bugs. I mentioned this on random. One, for whatever reason, all of the foliage, all of the grass loaded about 10 feet above the ground, which was interesting. And the other one is it kept resetting my conversational flags. So if I came back to a character I haven't talked to in a while, the game would think it's the first time I talked to them, which was annoying. It didn't break anything because you can still turn in quests. Your dialogue will just be like, "Oh, I already did that," and it'll continue the game from there. But kind of annoying in terms of immersion.
Mm.
Unless, of course, Auntie's
Yeah, yeah.
choice is like brainwashing their people with their Purple Berry Crunch cereal, and they're losing their memories. That's
Purple
gonna be
Berry
my head
Crunch.
headcanon. Um, yeah, but on the whole, really big fan of it. Liked it, enjoyed it a whole lot.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to playing it like eventually for sure.
Yeah, I guess this like because I'm really interested in you expanding on one of the things you said, John, which is like that you don't like because when people describe this game, it sounds like it is just improved Outer Worlds 2, but or improved Outer Worlds 1, but like it seems like a lot of people are just hesitant to go that far, and I just want to connect this maybe to like a larger conversation point here during this era. It's just obviously Obsidian is owned by Microsoft now, which is one of gaming's biggest forces in terms of publishing. Huge mega corporation in themselves, and I'm just interested in getting your thoughts here for this Microsoft era. How you see the Microsoft acquisition affecting Obsidian's work, your impressions of Obsidian's work, um, and just like, yeah, how do you feel about this general era in terms of like being under the purview of Microsoft?
I think on from Microsoft's end, it's the best acquisition that they've made, or like the best use of an acquisition that they've done. I think they've honestly dropped the ball on a lot of their larger like multi-billion-dollar acquisitions thus far. But um, in in Obsidian's case, I think that like there might be a bigger push for Microsoft to make these franchises, like these original IP franchises. So I could see, depending on how Outer Worlds 2 does, like there being an Outer Worlds 3 down the line. Looks like they're doing a sequel to Grounded as well. Maybe more from the Pillars of Eternity kind of thing. But I also think like with the appropriate money and like funding and time behind them, I think finally, like, I'm hoping that we can see more of Obsidian not as an iterative developer. I think that Pentiment might be the first, like, non-iterative game that they've made, maybe, period. Like, it's you can't compare it to anything of like, oh yeah, this is like Fallout, or oh, this is like that BioWare game, or this is like, so I really want to see more. And that doesn't mean like if it has to be small indie games, like relatively small indie games, I would love that. Um, but yeah, I'm really hoping that like Microsoft gives them the appropriate leeway to do like original IPs that are truly original and play original and like play to Obsidian's strength. So yeah, a part of me is like I'm hoping that it's not just like, hey, another franchise machine, just like they've done with like whatever the Gears of War studio is called in the 343 studio for Halo. Like, I hope it doesn't become that, and I hope that they respect Obsidian for what fans love them for.
I'm not entirely certain why they treat certain studios worse than others, or why other studios do worse than others. Like, in terms of my opinion, like Microsoft buying Arcane and buying Rare just destroyed both studios.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely destroyed both. Their acquisition of Bethesda didn't really do anything to change. I feel like we would have gotten Starfield regardless. And then there are
Yeah.
other studios like Obsidian and Double Fine that are thriving
yeah.
under Microsoft, and they don't have to worry about where their funds are coming from for their next games. And clearly, like Double Fine just released, what's it called? It's the Lighthouse game, weirdest damn game probably of 2025, and like getting big reviews. It's clearly not a commercial game, so Microsoft isn't influencing them there. The Outer Worlds is extremely critical of large corporations, and I know there is a discourse about how a company, a massive corporation, is releasing a game that is critical of corporations, but it's still very much in tune with the messages of the Outer Worlds. And the game Avowed, as much as I couldn't get into Avowed and the Outer Worlds 2, certainly, these are the exact type of games that Obsidian has been making for years, their entire career. Like, there is no difference. If anything, I would say that my biggest criticism of Obsidian is that the Outer Worlds 2 feels very much like a throwback to an earlier era that does really nothing to push the genre forward or innovate very much. It
Mhm.
just does what it does very, very well. I don't have a problem with that because I love what it does. But you could make the argument that maybe Obsidian is getting a little bit stuck. They're a little bit in a rut, but it's not a
Mm.
very big rut. It's a very roomy rut. It's a good rut. Jesus, that's sounding terrible. But it's they're rutting great.
A gilded
No, it's
cage.
yeah. I think they're doing fine. I do. I mean, I think The Outer Worlds was a very, very good game. Haven't played Grounded. Heard astonishing things about Pentiment. People really like Avowed, and Outer Worlds 2, aside from the review bombing, is getting the exact same reception that The Outer Worlds got. Like, there's nothing wrong with this era of Obsidian. The question
Yeah.
is whether or not their best work is behind them. Um, and I don't think that's the case. I don't think we can judge based on like a series of pretty successful games, both commercially and critically, uh, that we can say, oh, their best days are behind us. Because Pentiment is like nothing else, as both of you said. And honestly, like there's no reason why they couldn't knock out a Pillars of Eternity 3 and like blow the roof off the place again. Like that could very much happen. Um, Many of the people who say things like, "Oh, well, that's," like there's a current discourse online about Metroid Prime 4, and people are very angry that there's a lot of whipping and things like that, and it's the people are like, "Oh, they're changing into a Marvel movie," and didn't they learn their lesson with Other M? And people are saying, "Well, yeah, but the people who made the Prime series aren't working there anymore. Like these are different people." I don't think that argument necessarily holds water, but I will say that the people who are working at Obsidian right now, or the people who were working at Obsidian years ago, or the people who were working at Black Isle years ago. So they're still doing what they do, and they do it very, very well. And they're probably going to continue doing it because The Outer Worlds 2 looks like it's going to be a relatively big success for them. Not
Yeah.
a massive one, but enough to get another couple
Yeah.
of games going. And I think that Microsoft right now, considering how incredibly poorly they're doing with all of their other studios, are happy to accept a successful game.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think they've even said that much in terms of just like, no, we're happy with the numbers we're getting from Obsidian. Like, it's not like total AAA blockbuster numbers, but it is just consistent success, which is great.
Hmm.
And to your point, also, like, yeah, both Double Fine and Obsidian, I've heard devs from those studios just saying, like, yeah, for the most part, Microsoft just lets us cook,
Mhm.
and trusts us to execute our vision, which is nice to hear. Honestly, I would say, like, in terms of that point of is Obsidian's best work behind them, I would not go that far because Pentiment is a top 3 Obsidian game for me. But there is just a feeling I have in terms of this era. Like, earlier I compared, like, Obsidian in their early days, like, feeling like a punk rock RPG studio, and their work now just feels to me like a punk rock band after they signed their major record label deal,
Mm. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's like there's a lot of those rough edges that were ended up being problems in those early releases is replaced with a nice coat of polish, which is good, and they're able to iterate and come up with new concepts well in that kind of new space. But there's also, like, rough ambition in their earlier work that I feel is missing in these games.
Yeah.
And Pentiment is like a reach for something new, completely new, and it executes it with a lot of confidence. And I love that game, but, like, it's still just like it's different. The vibe with Obsidian's work now is a little bit different. I don't know if that's me reading too much into it, if it's something that you all don't feel as much, but it's something that I can't really get out of my head with this current era.
No, it's 100% like you said. Like it's like the old thing of like the dog chasing the car. It's like what will it do when it actually catches the car? So it's like Obsidian is always chasing this ambition, and we've praised them so much in this episode for their ambition. And it's like, great, do it. Now you have the time and the money. You have everything you need. Show us. And like the pressure is on, I think. Like they've caught the car. And so far they've mostly delivered, but like they got to keep pushing the RPG genre forward, or I guess like pushing what is an RPG, because they've done a lot more beyond just like CRPGs, which they started with.
I'm totally fine with them getting into kind of like a rut. My fear is if they were a band, they're going to be moving into their, like, I don't know, Maroon 5 or Coldplay eras where it was like,
Yeah, that's
oh
what I'm
no,
scared of.
the best days are clearly behind them, and yet they're still churning it out. But they're not even remotely there yet, and I don't think there's any
No.
sign that they are. The Outer Worlds 2, Avowed, certainly Pentiment. These are two very solid games, and probably a a pinnacle game of its genre. There's nothing wrong with the studio, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am not ready to sound any alarm bells. I have that feeling when I play newer Obsidian games compared to older ones. But
Mm.
I guess that just leads us to maybe our last point of discussion before concluding. As we conclude, what do you guys hope for the future of Obsidian?
Okay, God, look, I get that they're saying, oh, no, we're done, and they've moved past it, and everyone's like, well, I don't even know if I'd want Obsidian to make Fallout New Vegas 2. No, I really want another Fallout game, and because Todd Howard doesn't seem to be, interested in doing that right now, I would be a massive fan of Microsoft going to Bethesda being like, hey, we have season 2 of this thing coming out this December. You still haven't given us a new game. All we have is Fallout 76. We're giving it to Obsidian. They're going to make us a new game. And I would be like, yes, please. And that would be awesome, because I feel like New Vegas, much more than 3 or 4 or 76, is a much smaller scale game. Like, yeah, you go to Vegas, but like most of your time isn't spent on the strip. Most of your time is spent on in these like small outlying settlements around Vegas. And in that way, it's almost like a classic throwback Dragon Quest-esque RPG where you're like in these areas solving the problems of like these various townships. It's a smaller scale game, and in a world where theoretically all of society has been destroyed, that actually kind of works better. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing, they really like factions. I wouldn't
Mm.
mind seeing a Fallout game where you're dropped into a world basically very similar to Fallout New Vegas, except the strip doesn't exist, really, like nothing that big. And instead of there being like the big factions, every town is a faction, and you actually need to like pull the towns together into a functioning government, society, that kind of thing,
Mm.
and like work out diplomacy between them, work out their problems, pick sides. I think that would be pretty cool. And I think that Obsidian would excel at that kind of game.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way
Yeah.
to progress from there, and I think it also addresses that criticism Zach had of New Vegas maybe feeling a little too cynical,
Mm.
and just like kind of building on that and giving the players some agency in terms of like creating coalitions within the world. I think is a really interesting step. But how about you, Matt?
Yeah, I can't think of like a genre even that I want them to play in, but I want like the creative quest progression that New Vegas has. And then I also want the depth of dialogue that Pentiment has. So if they can find a way to like truly flesh out the freedom and like choice, like Pentiment with multiple endings, you know what I mean? Like that kind of depth is what I want. Not just a relatively canned story, like
Hmm.
a bottle with a wide base, you know what I mean? Like Pentiment was. I want like the whole ocean. But we've talked a lot about like original IP, but honestly, like when I think about like the Obsidian that I love in the old days, I'm like Microsoft owns a ton of IP and franchises that are have like very juicy established lores. It might be fun to see Obsidian do like smaller narrative focused games within the worlds of like I don't know, like a Wolfenstein or something like completely
Oh
off
my god,
kilter,
you
right?
want to shove them back into their work for hire era.
I kind of do, yeah. Like, give me that or like dwarfs. I don't know. Give me.
That's what you know what? That's what we want from Obsidian, all of
Yeah.
us. We don't want we want dwarves. We were promised dwarves, damn it.
I want 7 dwarf games.
Yeah, well, while everybody else is on the forums complaining about lack of New Vegas 2, I'm just going to be reminding everybody about dwarfs
We
constantly.
could have
Never,
had dwarves.
never
Remember what
forget
we
dwarfs.
lost. Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely would like to see just more of those Pentiment style passion projects from them at this point. If we were gonna go big with some older IP, I mean, KOTOR 3 would be a dream product if
Oh man.
Obsidian was created by them, but without Chris Avellone on the team anymore, I don't know if it would be the same thing at this point. Same with Alpha Protocol 2, a game I know they would want to make, but yeah, that some of that main creative talent behind those games is gone. But yeah, I like Obsidian when they're weird. I like them when they're ambitious, and I hope that in this current Microsoft era, even as they're putting out these very solid releases, they never completely lose that. But yeah, that's our Obsidian encounter. So thank you all for joining me today. That was a really enjoyable and interesting discussion, I think. So let's just do some housekeeping in terms of what's coming up on Retro Encounter. In 2 weeks, we're going to be revisiting our tier list episode. So this one will be on Dragon Quest. We've had one tier list episode in the past. It was on Final Fantasy. Had a lot of hot takes. Emotions got a little bit heated. We'll see if the same thing happens with Dragon Quest. After that, there's going to be as the kind of final episode of the year, we're doing a 30-year throwback to do a retrospective of RPGs released in 1995, which includes such games as Chrono Trigger, the American release of Earthbound, and many more games that are about as good as those. If you want to email us, you can do so at retro@rpgfan.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter/X, Blue Sky, Twitch, and YouTube as RPG Fan or RPG Fan.com. And you can also join our RPG Fan Discord. We also have a shop, the RPG Fan Shop, hosted by T Public, where you can get, as Matt was talking about, some really cool shorts, apparently. So if you want to
Woo.
learn more about the shorts, you can get a review from Matt. We also have 2 other podcasts, including Random Encounter, which our very own Jono here hosts, covering recent releases. I don't know, Jono, do you want to plug anything coming up for Random Encounter?
When's this coming out again?
This is going to be next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay, well, in that case, our last episode would have been The Seance at Blank Manor, and that would have been Caitlin on, and we also are talking about the remaster of Siberia, and that would be Matt. So they were on, and coming up in the next few weeks, because it's, oh my god, November, we'll be having our year in review episode, which it used to be a retro episode. We're moving that over now to random, and we're also doing our most anticipated episode. So those will be at the end of December and beginning of January.
Okay, unreal. That sounds great. And those are two games I'm definitely interested to hear more about. And our second podcast is Rhythm Encounter, which is a podcast devoted to RPG music and everyone's love of RPG music. You can review us on whatever platform you listen to the show on, such as Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, whatever you like. We love feedback, especially of the 5-star variety, as Zach would say. And lastly, individually, where could you reach out to us on social media or whatnot, starting with you, Jono?
You can send me a message at jlogan@rpgfan.com, or you can also add me on Blue Sky at jonologan@bluesky.social.
Okay, and Wes, if people want to contact you, how do they reach you?
You can mostly find me on Blue Sky at Lone Weasel.
And you, Matt?
And if you want to read writing that's not as good as Pentiment, my website is mattwardellwrites.wordpress.com.
I mean, if it's anywhere in the sphere, it is very much worth reading still, I'm sure.
It's
and
not.
you can I mean, you're going to be your own biggest critic. I don't believe you. Okay. And then if you want to reach out to me, you can do so at alexfraniczek@gmail.com. Once again, thank you all for joining us. And we will see you next time. Good night and good luck.